Minutes as written.
Aye.
Thank you. And Chris, we'll go right away to update and orientation and balanced scorecard. And then we'll move right into reviewing, discussing, and finalizing, okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you, Chris.
Just basically key off of this, which we have printed out for you. And I'm just going to quickly take a minute and go over the format, because you're seeing a printed format of it. This is a Excel spreadsheet, and it's basically structured around a number of tabs. You've got an email and take a look at it. And there is a cover page to it, which has the Indiana seal and the other pieces that. Thank you.
Presented on the front here, it's split into pieces, but that's the part that holds your objectives and lagging indicators primarily on that first page. We typically keep that as a separate piece because a lot of organizations like to use that as the public part of their scorecard. So there are tabs for each of these goal areas that will specify both your strategies, which in this case have been filled in, and we've reproduced those pages with this printed copy. And there are also tabs for projects. Ultimately, when you get down to the road, projects that are based on each one of these. So the front page is pretty simple. You see the objectives are listed in that left-hand column, and there's a section which specifies what the metrics are that you're going to look at as lagging indicators under each one of those objectives. Then there's a section which allows you to record the baseline for each one of those metrics and then set targets, and that's another important part of using this to manage, is to set expectations for where you expect those metrics to move in the future. So that's pretty much it. It's a fairly simple document. Once you get a chance to look around and play with it online, you can see that you can move back and forth from the tabs, focus in on what strategies have been identified for each one of the goal areas, and each one of those pages has a number of different columns that you can use. Right now we pretty much just populated the actual strategy column. There's a section of comments for each one of those. Each one of the strategies that we put in there has a provenience to it, and that's really what the comments column right now is being used, is to tell you whether that material came from foundational strategies, which are things that we at CELT have seen as big rocks that need to be looked at. We also incorporated the material that came out of the monitoring report, because those seem to be some important strategic mandates that need to be addressed. And then the material that we've gotten from the goal teams. Plan were suggestions of strategies, and so I've maintained those in here. So this first version that you see here is basically a attempt to culminate and organize all those different thoughts into some sort of coherent pattern. So that's really just the format of it. You can see you got your mission statement and vision statement across the top of the page. And anybody questions about the format of the thing? Because clearly what we're really here
We have in brackets lagging indicators.
Yeah, on the first page, yeah, is where we would typically put the lagging indicators, which again, as we've said, are the numerical aspects of your objectives, your SMART objectives. The leading indicators would appear on the strategies page. So for each strategy, if you go over to one of the strategies pages, and we've tried to put in suggested leading indicators, certainly for all of the big rocks foundational strategies that we've identified, as well as some suggestions of put your leading indicators, which again are tied primarily to those strategies. They're ways that you can assess whether the strategies are working.
Another way to think of it, Dan, is this first page that's formatted like this is sort of the public-facing document.
Mm-hmm.
It has your highest level measures, those are the most static, if you will, that you keep year after year. And this is the kind of thing you want on your website. The behind-the-scenes stuff, those strategies pages. Not that you would release them to the public, but they're just more
Right.
working documents. So those have the leading indicators that are more likely to change over time.
Without getting into content, this is the board, I'm gonna do this strategic plan for the state of Indiana. And it gives us a way to start a meeting, and we would know with the lagging indicators what are the measures. The leading indicators are a lot more about inputs and what we have to do, do these things, and they should drive these numbers.
Right.
And we can watch and say, where do we want to put a resource to make sure these leading indicators are taking place? Have we followed through? We'll get in the content in a minute, but something like I read 3, did we stay flat? Did we go down? Did we go up? Those would be lagging. And we want to constantly look at what are we doing to move that. David?
As we talk about
Exactly.
structure, I'm going to go to the end. The DOE and certainly all the board members and so forth. And I envision this as a living document that
Right.
items will be plugged in as data is collected. So at any
Exactly.
point in time, as an assessment dashboard, we'll be able to drive
Exactly.
the dashboard and look at a snapshot in time on a daily basis or weekly basis or monthly basis if we
Absolutely.
want to do that. Is that where you're
Exactly.
headed with this?
That's exactly right. And parts of it will change more frequently than others. On a quarterly basis. And they should be updated. There should be one person who keeps this document current, and they're gathering the data from all the different sources and populating this and then publishing it again. Some places publish it to their website. Some school districts make this a public-facing document and make it known to the world how well they're doing. Some keep it internal. If you're a private business, the contents of this particular, your strategies, are confidential because it talks about how you're going to deal with your competition and go-to-market kinds of things, and so you keep it very confidential. But in
Say that we're missing one of the leading indicators, that
Yeah.
it's not panning out according to goals and objectives that we
Right.
set. And by the way, if we have annual goals, I'm sure we're going to have milestone goals along the way,
That's right.
I assume.
That's a
Okay.
leading indicator.
So let's say we're missing a particular milestone goal. What's the mechanism for creating a document that would enable us to take some action that
Sure.
may not be on this document? Is that the project column that we would
Yeah.
go to, or are there other ways?
Head to the end in mind.
Right.
What are you going to do with it? And it's exactly as you say. On a regular basis, I would start your meetings actually with on at least a quarterly basis, have a session where let's look at our leading indicators and see how we're doing. And you'll delve into some of these. And data that's or about the strategy that's not working. There should be a project behind the scenes putting that in place. And so you would turn to the project status to check on the project status. So where is the project behind schedule? Did it not hit all of its did it not deliver all of its scope or what have you, that what's not working? Or were we just wrong in this assumption? It's just a bad assumption and it's not going to work. And you ask those questions. And the moving parts are somebody to maintain this, somebody to maintain kind of a track record of what projects have you launched from this, and we'll leave you with a list of, here's the 10, 15, 20 different projects that we think are needed to implement the strategies in here. And, and you need somebody to monitor that and launch that, all of which I think you all can do on an ongoing basis. But that operationalizes it. And to that end, what you want in here are the things that you all are interested in. There are a lot of operational things that people do that you're not really, you don't want to know about, right? But there are some very strategic things that you do want to know about. Your transportation costs right now. I mean, that's probably not something that you want to track. It's not strategic, it's tactical. So what goes in here are things that are really strategic. It's your opportunity to say, this is what we want to do differently for the future. And we want to track our progress towards doing that differently through these leading indicators. So there's so you want to winnow this down to be those few things that you really want to pay attention to, and leave out the more the operational tactical stuff. And what I wanted to do today was to walk you through, let's think about this thing in that way. Make this something that the public could, especially the first page, the public could look at and readily understand the measures for. And then have you also a set of behind the scenes leading
And there might be other comments before we move forward. You can get lost in too much data. Then you lose the big picture.
You can. You absolutely can.
And our big thing is to make sure that our lagging indicators, the mighty outcomes that will drive us towards this compelling vision, are being achieved.
That's
And
exactly.
if they're not,
exactly.
then we'll probably dig deeper in some of the leading indicators. Why aren't these things moving?
That's right.
Or did we pick just had we've had a disturbing, we've been informed by the U.S. Department of Education that we have a condition put on our waiver. I think we ought to keep in mind as we do this and lagging indicators that the U.S. Department of Education sees we have very clear goals, on accountability and all that, and we measure them and we watch them and we have good data to back it up.
Right.
And hopefully we won't get in this position. We can keep that. We just came fresh off of a day-long meeting to look into that, and we could, as we set these, we ought to be cognizant, in my view at least,
Exactly.
what elements are in the waiver and why, what kind of
Right.
things is the federal government asking us for. It was always my opinion when we originally did the waiver, I was on the board, the things they were asking for, we were asking for, so it was quite
the process to a degree, because that becomes what you've got to focus on now.
we got to get that right.
And if you don't do that, then if you don't get those things right, then you're going to have some other serious issues. So to a large degree, that made up some of the many, if not most, of the strategies that are now in here. So we pulled those and put those in here, and you see those in here. And we even suggest some
Matt, and what the priorities are. Well, now that Dr. Oliver's here, you want to use that one, Lisa, as a mic, please? Now that Dr. Oliver's here, we'll get in the meat of the meeting. You go ahead in front of us. Make a grand entrance here.
You said something I want to say again. The fewer of these measures, the better. Particularly if you can pick a few that represent a lot of other things. That if you get this one measure right, it means that you've got to get a whole lot of other measures right. Let me give you an example of what one might be. I was just in Florida this week where we were working with some folks to put together some measures around do they have they up to that date, have they taken all the courses that they were supposed to take? Did they pass the EOCs and the course tests that they were supposed to pass? Do they have the grades that they need to graduate? Have they turned in all the prerequisite work? And they track that metric, and it's a roll up. You have one. A lot of other things, and if a school has a good grade, that means they've got a lot of other things right. So if you're looking at school grades, maybe you don't need to look at AP, IB, those kinds of things separately. You just look at school grades. And if that one's not returning the kind of numbers that you want to see, then you begin to take that apart and look at what's not working here and why. And using that to begin the point of departure for asking questions about what's not working and dive down into it.
You know, along that line, before we get started, I would encourage this subcommittee, when we give the report to the board, data that we have historical information on that drives larger outcomes is something else I'd watch. For instance, I've always liked graduation rates without waiver.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing that, there's a whole bunch of stuff underneath there probably going right.
That's right.
I read 3. I always like the percent passing both parts of I-STEP. If people are passing I-STEP along the way, we're probably going to get a lot of these other things correct.
Correct. That's right.
And so as we make choices, less is more. You said from the beginning, I like historical data that's easy to understand for us and the public and our fellow educators in the field. And if they have multiple tentacles that they affect, then they draw us up in a lot of ways.
I'm going to give you, I didn't make copies of these. I thought maybe I could share them on screen, but I'm going to give you these 2 examples. One's from North Carolina, one's from Louisiana. Not that they have everything right. North Carolina's my own home state, and goodness knows we have a lot of room for improvement there as well. But this is one example of some good work, I think, of where they have be probably too disruptive. If they can just pass those around, I'm going to let you pass those around while I talk and get us going.
Okay.
But those are exactly the kinds of things you're talking about. I want you all to come up with those today as best we can.
Okay.
All right?
Is there any other questions about this part of the agenda or comments? If not, we'll keep moving. Okay.
Okay. Now the way that's what I want to do is go through goal 1 and look at particularly the measures and ask the question, are these the measures that we like? And can we winnow them down somewhat, or are there some other measures that we want to see? Some of these we can move to leading indicators tied to strategies. And I would suggest that some of these we might want to do that with. Particularly is all that they have done there is to say what % of our students are at grade level for our EOCs and our end of course, end of grade tests. That's the only question that they ask. They don't break it down by groups, by grades, or anything of that nature at the highest level. So right there, and then they trend it. And that kind of rolls it all up. You can see at a state level, how are our students doing? And it was on that first page that is going around I had it turned to that example. I would suggest that rather than breaking it down by grades, you roll it up together, if that makes sense. Is that some?
Just, and I haven't seen it yet, so just trying to clarify, if we roll it together, how does that data get reported back then on the score?
When you roll it together, what I would say is, particularly the public-facing version, if you want that detailed data, then I would ask for that detailed data to come separately. And even and you could drill down to say,
So you
okay,
click
well,
to get more detail.
yeah, and to get more detail, and click and say, you know, I'd like to see, okay, so our growth was flat. Was it flat across the board, all grades, all populations, and be able to drill down and see that.
So the number that would be reported on the main page would be an average across the board.
Exactly, yes, yes. And
So-
that just, yes.
Sorry. Yeah, that's-
Sure.
So in this example from North Carolina, they don't have any measures for reading or math. They just use name as the,
There were, no, they used end-of-course and end-of-grade in one of the
well, yeah,
screens
with
on
the
there.
high school. With high school, they used intercourse
Yeah.
assessment. But in reading and math, they only use NAEP scores.
Go ahead.
You're saying we're going to collect all this data, but how we present it to various populations will be different.
Yeah,
And so for the public, we may aggregate everything
Right.
and share it that way. But
Right.
as policymakers, I think it'd be critical for us to look at
It
the
is.
achievement gap by grade level and so
Sure,
forth.
sure.
And so as policymakers, we would have access, you're envisioning, to all of the disaggregated information.
yeah, yeah.
Because when we average everything up, we may not see the achievement gap, or we may not see a particular issue
right.
in upper elementary school.
That's right.
And so we'd be able to drill down into the data.
Yeah, and that's why I would keep these. I'm not saying throw these. I want to keep going back to it. If you have too much, you kind of get lost in the numbers, and particularly the public gets lost in the numbers, and you all will too. But knowing those few that you really want to track, that's what I'm encouraging you to think about. Okay,
Pete?
I'm pushing you to one end of the extreme, like what's here. You know, just a couple of numbers. But
I just want to be sure that if we do that, which I agree with, that we can drill down and get that data if necessary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because as you average everything together, it's not going to reflect truly what's happening
Right.
across such a complex organization as a number of schools.
Yep.
And so again, as long as that information is available, I'm comfortable with going with those broader strokes.
Sure. I think that information should be available today. And Glenda, you may know, but I'm certainly you know better than I do. You do have some longitudinal data over time with your performance data.
Use, if I understand correctly, the I read 3, language arts passing, ECA passing. Would those combine those two, or would you still have the range between groups?
I'm suggesting combine as much as you can for the public facing.
And then those become leading indicators.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or drillable, or drilled.
Someone's going to pull that up and look at it, but the percentage of students passing I read 3,
Yeah,
most folks are going to get.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that information is needed if you're going to do your objective, as it's written.
Yeah.
because the objective as written says that we're going to have a decrease in the range between subgroups.
Right. Yeah, you want to keep you do want to keep that on your balanced scorecard, the range. That is, regardless of how you roll this up, you want to keep that range.
We have some history on that, so you might, no, we wouldn't want to do it in too many subgroups, but you could get some basic close the gap type of measure. That you may have 10 or 20% of your students that aren't going to be ready to be.
Yeah.
Our mission is clear. We want to be productive. We want to participate in the economy, the culture, and society. And if we're leaving groups behind, that won't work.
Yep.
So we have to get a basic measure on that without getting lost in the educator in a building, and groups will want to.
I ask you to say those measures again that you saw as key, and slowly so I can write them down
Okay.
this time.
Well, first of all, I'd like to, just as we're in this, back up at BJ. We put a lot of time in iRead3, and we started out of the block making some progress. We were proud of it. I think this year we were flat. Is that correct?
Slight increase, but basically 0.2.
Okay, so that's an achievement. With it. We want more students passing that because it's a key.
I read 3.
Yeah, and then right now what we call iStep. It's a test of basic skills. We have to drive. Ways. But if we have low socioeconomic status differentiation from the average, that's a gap, we want to close it, correct? How we want to describe that gap, we want to keep closing a gap so our students not only are moving up on average, but we're not leaving folks behind. We want everybody to participate in this culture and society.
So percent of students performing at grade level for in the socioeconomic.
Right, and you want to keep end-of-course assessments in there. And I suspect we want graduation rate.
Absolutely.
Without waivers. Yeah.
No, that's my question with iRead 3, because with iRead 3, there are waivers as well. Do we want to segregate between students passing iRead 3 without a waiver?
What's your thoughts, BJ?
In most cases, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have to have an IEP to qualify for a waiver. Is that correct? With iRead 3?
You have to have either EL program or special education.
My school in particular, we're at 96%, but we had 6 students. So I don't know the answer to that.
Deb, is the number that we publish, is that with or without waivers? The percentage, the percentage passing iRead 3.
It's actually displayed both ways. So the primary number is without waivers, but you can get into the number of students that did receive a waiver or good cause exemption.
So, you have any thoughts on that? I mean, if we do both, we're doing a little more information. But the waiver, you never.
Students qualify for waiver, and again, I'm talking much more specific than sport wants to give them a school. And we only awarded 5 of them because one student, teachers felt like was more than qualified, didn't give the effort, so he's going to have to take the remediation and take the iRead 3 again in the summer. So I do trust that teachers and principals are doing the right things in the buildings. I just wanted to bring it up that there are waivers included as well in iRead 3. I have no doubt they're being used responsibly, but I'm
accommodations that are built in at all levels based on IEPs. So I think that whether we decide to go that route or not, it needs to be all or none
Agreed.
across
And
the
that's why
board.
when it said graduation rates, that's why it hit me that,
Right.
do we want to do it with IRE
Yeah,
as well?
let me suggest something that might help you with your conversation. What we could do is, there are things that appear on this page, but then there's data that you want to see as you're looking and do the drill down. And let's start just keeping a record, Chris, of like the I-Step 3 with waivers is something you'd also like to see as you're reviewing your quarterly, status on this stuff. And,
But you don't think that fits here?
it's y'all's call. It can, if
reading throughout the grade levels. So that's why Lexile is mentioned here.
Mhm.
That can easily be transferred with the iRead 3 because on grade level, it can be measured in the same kind of Lexile measure. So easily transferable. And that's why you see the other grade levels on here as well
Sure,
in
sure.
measuring the literacy.
Yeah.
So it becomes when we look at iRead 3, we actually look at those are kids that are on grade level and what does that Lexile measure look like for third grade.
Brett?
I don't know that we would know the answer to this yet, but it seemed to me like if a balanced scorecard at best should help inform the public as to how we're doing on achieving some of these things. These metrics seem to be very consistent with what goes into NA to F formula right now. I don't know where that conversation's at. I guess the only thing I wanted to make sure I throw in here is not to lose sight of how do we align that. It seems like if there are metrics involved in the calculation A to F, those same metrics would be reflected in the balanced scorecard so that we're beginning to build in more than one setting an understanding of how we look at this issue, or at least what are the chief metrics, lagging indicators we constantly look at.
there, and I wouldn't repeat it. I would not repeat it. That's a great roll-up measure, your school grades.
You wouldn't repeat it, you wouldn't mirror it?
I wouldn't break out all its parts and
I
put it.
think
in.
Greg's telling be cautious.
Yeah, I'm agreeing. I wouldn't,
know you
I
were.
wouldn't disaggregate. Yeah,
I know
but
you
I'm
were.
just saying the ingredients, I guess, if that's what we're looking at right now, when
Yeah.
we're saying
Same
ECAs,
ingredients.
I-STEP, how you aggregate it or how much you disaggregate it's another discussion, but
Yeah.
the key ingredients should be, I don't know why we'd say in one instance for AF, we're looking at these things, but for the scorecard, we're not gonna look at a different set of metrics. I don't know why we would do that.
The,
but-
the only
Exactly.
thing I want to be cautious there. I tend to agree, except for there's some what I'll call big rocks.
Mhm.
The A through F my school is a D. Now, how you got there becomes, we even had quite a hubbub about that within the last 18 months, and we had someone review it and said it was plausible, and so
Mhm.
it came out fine at the end, in my opinion. But there are some large metrics B or A in a community because of some of the growth and percentages. So I think on the table, what I've heard, and I think you asked me to restate it, we want to know IREAD 3 as it is, the waiver information we can get. And we want to know graduation rates without waivers. Seems to me whatever our standard, we put a lot of time in standards, we're going to test proficiency of the standard. We that lead and we the taxpayer and we the parent and we the student and we the educators that work so hard ought to know what % of our students are proficient. End of course assessments would be part of that, basic. So it seems to me that we need to know if students are graduating without waivers, if they're passing our basic skills test that we've designed. IREAD 3 is so important, the reading, we put a lot of work in that. Are there any other great big measures? Is this where you would put the % of schools that are A and B, or?
It comes later. I got you later.
Okay,
And I put that in
rolled up in here.
I just think there's a lot of moving parts that are going on because we're having the subcommittee assessment conversation.
Right.
And so putting in like an end of course assessment that may or may not be there when we get the actual assessment piece all finished. I think some of these we're going to have to almost defer as to what it might be until after that work gets finished.
Well, why don't we, go ahead, BJ.
With the Lexile-based measure reading growth, you said we're going to do that. The plan is anyway to do that kindergarten through 8th grade. Are we going to formalize that ever with, I don't speak out of turn, but with an iRead 5 or an iRead 7 or something like that? There's almost an exhale once you get through 3rd grade. Like, and when we talk about a sense of urgency, I see that. Are we going to formalize the Lexile-based measures, or is that, how will that be?
The reason the department put Lexile on here is because it can happen in a variety of ways. So it's a measure that we can attach to the state assessment piece if we want to go, because we can actually determine Lexiles and disaggregate out reading. If we wanted to have a separate assessment piece that was on reading, which was different. I mean, I don't know what we're going to come out with, but Lexile is a measure that we can do. For the Lexile range is for the actual groups.
Sarah?
Is that something that's specifically written into the RFP at this point that the vendors would need to require as part of the assessment option that we take?
Well, RFI includes looking at all of the multiple measures of reading and language arts. and
Right,
all
I
of
just
that.
meant if we're specifically listing Lexile, has that been specifically put in the
I
request?
honestly don't know, Michelle. I don't think we went as specific to say Lexile, but that's something that we might determine as a subcommittee to ask them questions about when they
Right.
come.
I
We
I
wanted
was
to be
basically
very
just wanting to
general
make
in
sure
the
that
RFI.
this lines up with what we're requesting.
Well, that's why
as well.
I made my comment that
Mhm.
we're kind of talking about all of these different things.
Oh,
So,
Go ahead, Dave.
BJ's question was a little different, as I understand it. It's really a conceptual policy issue. What BJ is saying, as I heard him, is we now require passage grade level or 7th grade, whatever you want to do. And I find that really intriguing to track not only a 3rd grade level, but have a requirement, sort of a gate in which students also have to meet that particular requirement. I think it's a great idea, since reading drives a lot of academic success. I'll turn to our legal authority here, and I assume that if we were to make a change where we would require some kind of an iRead 5 or iRead 7, to use BJ's language, that we would need to come back through the rulemaking process and amend what we currently have. Is that the way we would do that? Or is there just a motion and a vote of the board? How would that work if we decide to pursue that?
So I guess I'm thinking of this in a couple of pieces. So obviously there's the assessment portion where or what we call the reading rule. And that's where what most people think of with the iRead 3 rule, but it actually is broader than that, and it applies for all elementary schools. And it would just, we would have to expand the language to address that. If I could, just hearing the conversation, and since I've been talking with Self, you know, this document that you all are working on is a living document, and obviously we're not going to change assessments for at least a year. So if you come up with measures that are specific to the assessments that we have in place right now, as we make changes to assessments, then you would just change the strategic plans, the balanced scorecard to reflect
Matter of fact-
those large changes.
Matter of fact, I was going to say the exact same. This is living. I would go with what we're doing. In other words, to change Lexile language and all, I would not do that. I think it's important for our group to hold on to what we know, and it may even inform, I'm sure it will inform what we may do in the future, and then we can change our strategic plan and what we're going to measure. But I'd take the opposite approach. I wouldn't hold off putting what we know and is concrete and large in this plan, because that's what we know. If the board wants to add some new metrics, then we could do that later. But I wouldn't go to a whole new lexicon here or measures. I'd stick with the path we set some time ago and we can measure it. It'd be my thought.
Let me say what you just said a slightly different way. For this scorecard, this part, focus on I read 3, you could put a strategy in the strategy part that says explore expanding I read to I read 5, I read 7, and to capture your thought. But it's not a measure yet because you don't have it, but you're
Pardon me?
Where does that fit in here?
that goes, that would go in
More like
this
a
section here, the
Under
strategies.
the blue bar.
The strategies.
Strategy.
These are things that aren't necessarily in place yet, but are things that you think are important that you want to see happen. And they're things that drive you to this objective. And I hear you saying that, one of the things that I've seen driving reading scores up is the seriousness with which these folks take that gateway, that third grade level. So let's repeat that at the 5th grade. That's a strategy to drive you towards this objective. And so that would require a project, right, to put that in place. And that would be something that you all would monitor as you go forward. And that's how the instrument is supposed to work.
So if I was going to recap, I read 3. I still the gap between free and reduced lunch students' performance and others, I think, is that the gap we used? I'm trying to remember.
I think the subgroups we look most often at are reduced lunch.
Special
That's where our
education,
biggest gap is.
language,
Different minority subgroups.
language.
Yeah.
So, and then end-of-course assessments, graduation rates without waivers, just like I read 3 without waivers. Are those the core things if we, new ideas may be incorporated in future testing and assessment?
I think the answer is yes. The only thing I'm wrestling with is looking at the other states, the examples that went around, is whether or not something like NAEP is useful to keep in there just for some national, to see how in step our students are.
Well, let's look at our mission and vision real quick.
Yeah.
Indiana will be a national education leader in academic achievement and college and career readiness through a relentless commitment to innovation in teaching and learning, where students are equipped to make significant contributions in diverse communities and global marketplace where they live and work. Given that, what would be the measure you're talking about?
I think your NAEP, English, and math. We're going to say Indiana's leading. You don't have to put it here to keep your eye on the ball. We're still going to look at NAEP data, whether it's in the scorecard or not. I think what we're saying is, what do we believe as a board is the metrics that are most going to inform how our students are performing.
It seems
And-
congruous with our vision.
I would agree, particularly with your adoption of your own standards. I think that's sort of proof that, you're keeping up or surpassing the national norm. Very good.
And that's where, honestly, like, where my thought process came, was the success we had on NAEP last year. I mean, Arnold Duncan said Indiana knocks it out of the park. I mean, that's due to the fact, to the things that we put in place, like I read 3. So that's why I wanted to
Yep.
eventually look and expand that.
So where do you put that on here?
Well, that would replace
Yeah,
all this,
yeah.
because these are,
So what we originally identified as literacy, college and career readiness, CTE, STEM, and graduation with that waiver, and character and citizenship, you're saying replace all that?
No,
with
that
what
would
we just
stay.
said?
What I would
Stay
say
there.
is, and tracking
Study
those
that.
kind of scores, that's a strategy that you will implement as you implement assessments. CTE, and that was one of the things, is critically important. I get the importance of CTE. But at this level, what you're saying is you're really interested in that the children graduate. And whether they're CTE graduates or they move on to college is secondary. I see this career and technical education as a strategy to get kids to graduate and go on into productive lives. So I would move this to the strategy section and track this there.
Yep.
And that unclutters this first page a little
Right.
bit.
Yeah, I
Take the inputs and let's get to the outputs
Right.
in here.
That's where I was gonna head, because I don't think we should view it as, we're not saying it's not important, but if
That's
the
right.
goal is that you're ensuring all students can really trying to communicate, did they learn?
Proficiency.
The question on each of these metrics is what does those metrics tell? That's why you have to measure something that's going to measure proficiency against standard, because that's going to answer that question.
It also drives your E through F.
It drives your A to F, and it's not that it's not important. It may be more appropriate to the strategy that's associated with the goal, and at some level deeper into the actual implementation of the scorecard, it's important to obviously teachers. Tell you that.
Exactly.
This is the tell of the tape.
Yep. So, and same thing with STEM. STEM
Right.
is critically important. It's a means to the objective. I think it's a set of strategies, and unless y'all are really deficient in STEM subjects and teachers and those kinds of things, and you want to really make a market improvement there, and that becomes do away with this stuff, because there's some good thinking in here. We were tickled with a lot of the thinking that was in here. It's just where you place it for emphasis. And a
Those
little bit of
aren't
this
really
is,
strategic outcomes. Those are
yes, right,
Those are inputs, strategic
yeah,
inputs that might drive our outcomes. We want outcomes here.
exactly.
They do become important, though, when you start communicating to the field towards how to
Yes.
make an impact on these
Right.
larger metrics. So that's why we don't want to lose them, because
Absolutely.
that's the discussion. Hopefully, it's happening with.
At the highest levels of organization of board,
That's right.
you're responsible for approximately a $10 billion investment
That's right.
in an enterprise that should get some outcomes. A graduate that doesn't have to be waived, a person that can read, someone that can pass a basic skills test. End of course assessments, that you should know what was taught in the course. That doesn't tell everything, but it gets to a baseline, whether it be a physician, you know, baseline where we can give leadership to the organization, then reapply people and resources and systematic approaches to driving the numbers.
Yeah.
David?
So with the emphasis on outcomes, then as we look from year to year or month to month or semi-annually, we're going to be looking at outcome indicators, and that's how we're going to judge our progress. We're not going to be looking at strategies, what percentage of schools are now using this strategy or that strategy, because now we're getting into the minutia of it. So at a policy level, we have a set of outcomes. And I think that's an important point too, as we look at some of these outcome measures, because in the past in education, we've sort of celebrated that we had a number of meetings.
Yeah.
And wasn't it great we had 20 meetings? We didn't accomplish anything, but we had a number of meetings. And so I think it's really important in this document, we really focus in on outcomes and remember it's the outcome achievement. There's no student learning
Yeah.
happening. And so I think we need to keep the emphasis on that because
Yeah.
historically we've again celebrated a number of meetings or we've done this or that had no impact
Traveled here,
on the
traveled
outcome.
there, yeah.
So it's really important.
In the field, Nick. Those kind of are questions to be asked. Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Oliver?
At the risk of you thinking I'm taking us back to wordsmithing, I did want to ask a question about the phrasing at the end of 1.1, because I think I understand, but this, to me, needs to be very clear, because if the objective is Indian students will they want to. And I think what we're really saying is we want to see a decrease in the percentage or the number of students not meeting proficiency within subgroup. I'm not sure because I don't know what that means to see a decrease in the range between subgroups. So that makes me think I'm comparing subgroups. I was thinking when we originally talked about this, if we're ensuring all children can learn, what we really were saying was we want the overall number to come up, and within each subgroup, we're looking for the percentage of kids not achieving to actually drop. And if that's
As we write this up,
Yeah.
Dr. Oliver?
and
Because that is, I think we all agree with that. We don't want groups, we want to decrease, we want to increase the passage rate.
you want to increase the aggregate and then decrease
Decrease it,
non-proficients
yes.
within each
You want to
subgroup.
increase everybody, but you want the subgroup.
Increase the number of non-proficient students in each of those subgroups. The overall aggregate's
Exactly.
going to go up.
Yeah, that's better wording.
So there's a wording issue there.
Yeah, I think so, because I
we
think
have
you want that to be
support
very
for that.
clear so that when you drop those metrics on top of it, everybody understands what we're looking at.
Yeah, I agree.
I think-
The other thing, we got character and citizenship, that whole block on that second page there. I think that moves to goal 3. It gets into that family, school.
You're
time.
suggesting that goes under 3?
Yeah.
The stakeholders one, families.
Where we talk about school, family, connection, that sort of thing.
Is everybody all right with moving that? Dr. Freitas?
I have a question about that. I'm very concerned about character education
Uh-huh.
and the sense that learners have, sense of responsibility, sense of civility, sense of getting along with people. And I'm not sure it's really a family. Always saying that they want workers who will show up on time
I know.
and contribute and so forth. So I don't want to lose that.
Sure, sure.
And so if you're saying that that can still be highlighted within that goal, I'm option to put it somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it would be at the same level, just under goal 3, so we wouldn't lose it under goal 3. And I was
So how would it read then?
um,
What page are you on? You're shifting many
Sure,
pages
sure,
and I'm
sure,
trying
sure.
to keep up with
It'd
you.
be under 3.
goal 3, which would be
3.
towards the back. And I mean,
It says Indiana will develop healthy family-school relationships as an
Okay.
objective. And then it's got little bitty
all kinds of. May I make a comment to support what you're saying, if that's okay?
Sure, could I just?
I was going to move it.
So
Oh,
you're
no,
saying you're
no.
going to
Not
move
there.
it and
Yes.
create one?
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry.
3.x, whatever.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. That-
Let's let Sarah comment. Sarah might have.
I actually,
insight.
and I don't want to speak for you either, so feel free to stop me if I am. I actually think moving it to goal 3 changes what our initial intention was with it. I think that it should actually be present within goal 1 and within goal 3.
Okay.
There's absolutely an element of character and citizenship within the family perspective that will add to what we're looking at within that goal, but I think that it's an important part of looking at academic success also, having it specifically student-centered within goal 1. So I actually would be in favor of keeping it in goal 1, but then also having elements within goal 3 that is more focused on the community and the family involvement supporting the learner. I think that they're two separate things, but in order for us to succeed, we have to have both elements.
So how would you put the outcome measure that the board would look at? And I think that's the second part of this question. You're making a good point that
Right.
it's an individual character traits, deferred gratification, honesty, thoroughness, stick-to-itiveness.
And in that regard, maybe it's a strategy instead of a measure, but I think that it has to be present within goal 1.
If we community is encouraging cooperation,
I think it
or is
speaks
that,
to
is
their
that enough of a
responsibility.
measure?
Yes, it is. In my mind, that's a great measure.
I absolutely think so. I think it speaks to the responsibility as a character within, or as a citizen within the school.
You're talking as part of
It's
goal
very
1.
seldom someone with good character gets kicked out of school. That can happen accidentally, where they're just the wrong guys at the wrong time, I guess. I've pleaded that myself.
Yeah, I've got a son who.
Accidents will happen.
I-
But what's the measure?
I accept Sarah's recommendation. I think it's a great one. I think it's so important. It should be in both places, and it really is different. Goal 1 would be on the individual learner, and goal 3 would time to take a look at, but the concept being that it should be in both goal 1 and goal 3, and then we could look at the measures separately or have staff create some measures for us.
And I think there may be some things in line with like the PBIS systems or whatever you're using that you could draw data from. Students are giving positive behavior slips saying, I saw you doing something honest, I saw you doing something here. I'm not sure how you track that,
Yeah,
but I know that we do.
that's a good leading indicator. The PBIS would be a strategy under goal 1 as a
And
way
those
to.
would not only say that, not only are you not doing bad things, but you're I'm sure there's a million different terms for them, but,
Attaboy.
yeah.
And add
I'll
a,
grow be proud.
Before we leave it, does anybody have any suggestions that you'd like research on how to measure character education? Other than my expulsion and suspension?
well, I'm going to make a comment about expulsion and suspension, only because I've seen it work this way in some school districts that I've been a part of, and you can make a goal and say, hey, we're going to have a decrease in suspensions and expulsions, and it will be done.
That's right. It will be
You just
done.
don't do it.
Yeah. You don't report
Doesn't
them.
mean you have better character, doesn't mean you have better discipline in your school.
Yeah.
It just gets done. In fact, in some cases, it means you have worse climate, atmosphere perhaps.
Because the consequences of
Because they haven't put
misbehavior
in,
is-
well, they haven't put in a PBIS structure. They haven't put in a structure that promotes that positive and really teaches kids how to have good character and citizenship. What we haven't assessed yet and is really, do all schools have those in place? I mean, we don't even know that they all do, and they should. They should all have them in place.
And that's a leading indicator.
That, and we can see what kind of quality programs they have, and we can look at their suspensions and expulsions to see if there's some things correlating there. But just using that as a single measure, that can be accomplished right away, and you won't really know.
And Glenda, you're raising a good point here. Some of these measures you have to be very careful with because just they will change by virtue of the fact that you are tracking them, and you want to have a corresponding the parent surveys about, what were the ratings about safe schools. So you'd want to see them trending, both trending in the same direction. If you got one trending one way and another, then you got a problem.
David?
What I'm promoting goes way beyond behavior. Behavior is
Oh, I
one
see.
little
Right.
component.
Yeah.
I'm talking about every child in Indiana is
Sure.
responsible, is honest. That would be the people within our profession who are really experts, who have all kinds of guides and materials and so forth, and really put forth how to create an individual that's a contributory person towards society.
Sure.
And so I want to be sure that
Don't
we
lose that.
have other kinds of outcome measures. I think suspension, expulsion, I'm not even sure it should be there for the kind of concept that I'm thinking of. I guess it could be, but I want to be happy with that.
Right.
But there are people out there who have done the research, who have published for many years, that could probably within 5 minutes give us the whole package that we could just drop into this document.
Anybody else, Brad?
I guess I have a question, just, with a balanced scorecard, I would think part of one of the things we're working through is at this highest level, that the measures are going to be valid and reliable. When you start getting in areas like character education, you start down a path of you have limited options on what you can gather, and that gets you into a discussion about self-reported data. Because the department could look at research, come up with some kind of a rubric, everybody reports. So I guess my question to you is, from a psychometric lens of how do I know the data is valid and reliable,
Right.
how does self-reported data fit into a balanced scorecard? Is it typically viewed within organizations or systems as okay, or do you try to steer clear of self-reported data?
Yeah, I'm always leery of that self-reported data, and that's what we were talking about just a minute ago. Even
It
behavior
certainly
data
is
is self-reported.
An instrument that's been basically already proven, it's going to give you some measure of relational health within that school that's
Yep.
gathered in a standardized fashion.
And I'm not sure about Indiana, but a lot of states have the surveys that go out annually, and part of it is school safety.
And restate that if there is no appropriate measure that we can truly count on and know will be 100% specific across the board, I'm fully comfortable with it going in as a strategy, not as a measure, but that we are still stating it as an importance that leads to positive academic growth. So I don't necessarily need to have it as a measure there, but I think it belongs there within goal one.
Okay,
And
and
the
let's
only-
keep a strategy, to David's point, that capture the essence of what you're trying to get. That becomes a project to make sure PBIS is in all the schools, and even specify perhaps even some of the characteristics of the program.
I guess it's a I think we do it indirectly, but there's not a formal way of doing it in schools and actually measuring it.
Okay.
We hold learners accountable every day for being honest and so forth and so on, but I guess holding them accountable and having something more formal is what I'm getting at. And so I guess I'm looking at formality in a way to measure it. The measure could be is
Pretty quick here.
Okay.
Dr. Oliver or Sarah? Sarah, you.
I was just going to, and I don't remember the specific name, I apologize, but I can find it and forward it to everyone. But there was just an article I was reading about an organization that is a national character education organization, and they had just awarded their schools of excellence across the country. I didn't notice any for support that kind of initiative where we will hopefully have schools on that list next year that are noted for character development.
Dr. Oliver, you have one more point?
Very, very quickly, Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to say, this is why we do balanced scorecards, though, right here. Point being, we could find that we've been focused on these other metrics and we've not focused on it. It's not to say we're not doing character ed, but everybody's doing their own flavor of it. There's not this concentrated focus. And one of the things I try to tell my leadership students, vision without a plan is hallucination. I heard Gene White say that one time. So the balanced scorecard, if nothing else, will bring that to the forefront, and it'll force us to think about how do we measure it. And then once we establish a way to measure it going forward in the future, it will have an effect on schools because they'll start responding.
So I'm going to wrap up what I think we've told our good folks to do. We would appreciate an outcome measure. For be suspended or expelled creates a terrible culture, terrible learning environment, test scores will go down. So is there a countervailing weight? Let's find out what we can learn out there. If we can't find a measure that we agree with, we'll put it in a strategy and give it an emphasis. Is that what we're hearing? So if you could, we could look to the data and research out there, then we can move on.
I think just to emphasize something that's been behind a lot of these conversations is, of course, underneath all of these measures need to be some sort of process or definition that system for determining character ed, then you're going to be unable to make comparisons across the state or things like that.
Just a quick name, Joyce Epstein
Yeah.
is the leader. If you just go to her and whoever's going to work on this, that would be the person
I
to
wouldn't,
contact.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't
she has a
mind
lot
a
of stuff
million
for goal
different
3.
flavors if they eat the food, so to speak. I mean, in other words, I want the outcome.
But you need to have some
Drive it is different.
correct.
I think maybe we should go to the Indiana will recruit, develop, and retain top-notch educational leaders.
If you don't
Human
mind,
talent?
Dan,
Let's go back.
can I suggest that rather than go to goal 2, let's talk about the strategies for goal 1.
Oh, okay. Before we move-
So that, because these are the things now that's going to make happen what you just talked.
We are humane here.
Yeah, consider
We're
the
taking a
outcome. if you don't.
10-minute break. So at 5 minutes till, we're coming back. Is that all right?
Huh?
How you
Thanks to
doing?
you, you have your coat on. I picked up on that. Very perceptive.
I'm doing the best I can, yeah. No, I'm writing down everything that's coming along, sure.
Yeah. I'm going to try and go. That was one of the things I wanted to ask Claire. Is there any funds for that?
Well, there.
Okay.
Actually,
Oh, they do?
use this instrument for, though, is
So they pay hotel and travel.
We're
Everything.
all right.
Yeah, right, no, not even, but for our expenses.
we'll see, we do see at a district level.
And I would stay, my favorite,
Hanging in
2
there.
days, then national conferences on the next day. I
Oh,
would
it
stay
is.
for all 3.
Okay,
Because your new
Well-
member will just be new members.
and does NASB pick up the?
I think we have everybody in the room. We have a lot of material to cover.
Okay. You may want to consider that. Oh, okay, that's great.
You wanted to talk strategies a while?
Yes.
Can we reconvene? We'll talk strategies a while, and you want some guide.
On it. These are the things that are going to take you to meeting the objective 1.1. And what I'd like for us to do is to look at these. Some are more strategic than others. You want sort of you want a short list. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that necessarily all of these things are important, because I think they're all important. And there are a lot of good ideas.
Not want a to-do list.
Yeah, right.
In other words, do
Right.
this, we want some strategies.
Exactly. Some strategies are really going to take you there.
I think that's a really important point too, and having looked at a lot of plans like this, a lot of times people tend to write strategies, statements of things they already should be doing.
Yes.
They're normal functions
Right.
of an entity.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the things I looked at as I was going through. I saw a lot of things and I went, well, we should already be doing that anyways, even if we didn't have a balanced scorecard.
Right.
So maybe I'm wrong, but as I looked at this, I was trying to find what are the strategies that are unique to the balanced scorecard
Yeah.
that would be above and beyond that should have an impact.
Sure. And often strategies are written, they're nice to do's, but they really don't have any intention of really doing them. And so you don't want those in here either. So this list came from some of the things that we bought from these work sessions from you all. The list came from also some of the goal. That's not really strategic in a sense, but then in another sense, it's sort of, if you don't do this, you're not going to survive. So you got to do them. So we think they're important. So 1.1 is it's a restatement actually of a lot of what we saw in the monitoring report to fully implement the new Indiana state standards to help the teachers understand the materials and provide the professional development and create some resource guides and those things so that you successfully implement the standards. So that's that first one there.
Can I push back on that just a little bit? Because I've been thinking about that a lot too, Rick. And here's the thing that I'm struggling with. I agree. I mean, I did read that in the monitoring report, but it seems to me like the strategy would be is you need to create a system that's going to do that on an ongoing basis so that you know that monitoring's happening. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
No, it makes perfect sense.
that's kind of where I'm wrestling with when I look through a lot of these. I'm going, is there a system or some kind of something that can be done to capture all that? I'm not saying those things aren't important, but these things should be going on.
So systemic process, continual improvement to understand.
Right. I'm hoping that the strategies we settle on deal with problems, not with symptoms of the problems. In other words, if we're not getting things monitored, is it symptom?
For example, down about midway, it talks about develop appropriate monitoring supports for the transition of all students to college and career-ready standards. You're looking for a systemic way to do that on an ongoing basis, so you don't have to send a group of people out to to visit every district and determine somewhat subjectively that that's occurring.
So episodic, that is not a system that's accountable. Well, I visited the space shuttle, I thought it was gonna be fine.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Everybody seemed real upbeat. I talked to everybody.
mm-hmm.
It didn't make it to outer space. Well, we felt good.
Yep.
We have to have a systematic kind of approach here that we know a process. And then there's really very few surprises.
Right.
Is it possible you could accomplish all these procedural kinds of things, or should be left to someone else? That we set the goal, we set the objective, and then it's the implementers that implement us and get us to that objective. Because if we're approving strategies,
Yeah, I would agree with you.
we're saying if you do these strategies, then you will meet the objective. I'm not sure we can do that as a policy board.
I agree, but that's where I go back to, I think the board does provide a sense of direction, and there is a sense of autonomy within that. If we say that the strategy is you will create a system for monitoring the implementation of CCR standards, that seems appropriate to me. If I start getting into the weeds and saying, and step one will be, and step two, then I think your point is just spot on. That would concern me, but that's just my thought.
And that's how I'm seeing some of these strategies. I think we may need an overall statement that we have to have a systematic approach that's sustainable, that reports data back, so sort of a set of guiding principles rather than specific, how do you get from here to there?
Yeah.
Our notion as a policy board is we're going to drive from Indianapolis to South Bend, Indiana, not you get in the car, you turn the key on. That's the implementation. That's someone else.
Yeah, I would, I agree with you. I would also take you, though, to the conversation that we just had about suggest a strategy like, across the board implementation in all districts of a PBIS program or something of that nature.
I would say the strategy is to meet the objective.
Let me complicate this a bit. One of the best strategies you could follow for goal 1 is to implement goal 2 with great effectiveness.
In fact, goal 1 is the measure for goal 2. I know.
In classrooms and great leaders in schools, it's going to be really happy meetings on these other reports, really happy. We are going to do a lot of celebrating because the good people drive it that are accountable with clear direction.
Now, I do want to go back to what you said about hallucinating.
I'm going to steal that.
Second.
By the way.
I object to that. That's my comment.
It's not that I oppose to hallucinating necessarily, but measures without something to say how you're going to do it is not going to get you there.
Could we do
BJ?
this almost like we did with RISE to say, okay, here's an example of what you can do. If you want to come up with your own, we're fine. If you have your own idea of how to do it, how to go to South Bend, get there. But if you don't, we're going to give you a map to get there.
But I think
And
ultimately,
that really limits it.
you need a way to be sure whether people got to South Bend or not.
Yeah.
And, in terms of this, for instance, if we just take the very first strategy across here, right now, there doesn't seem, I've asked the question, do you have any way of knowing whether, when the standards are implemented, that these standards are being followed in the classrooms? Because it seems to me that, that implementing a new set of standards can mean one of two things. It can either mean passing it and having it agreed on at this level, way of organizing people's teaching in the classrooms, and you're going to align a assessment piece to that. So somewhere you need to struggle with the question of how do you determine, how do you measure whether those standards are being applied in every classroom. Is that the type of process that you're referring to there, or referring to another process? Because I think that's an important strategy that the board may do, because I'm not sure anyone else will do it.
So let's play that out. So we're going to be implementing guidance and the assessment isn't there yet. And so, because the outcome really should be how well do students really do with the standards. We gather assurances from every school corporation, signed documents that say that they've aligned their curriculum with the standards. So we get that kind of assurance from the school corporations. But what you just suggested is, how do you know that it's actually happening in the classroom level? Well, we don't until we see the results necessarily on the assessment. In terms of student learning, that's how we're going to assess that standards are being learned. Now, we can, put in more monitoring pieces to say, and go in and are you doing they are aligned with the standards. So I'm not quite sure, what kind of outcome you're looking for. If you're looking for student learning, it's going to be an assessment that happens later.
That's the lagging indicator. This is the strategy to achieve it.
Yeah, we're not talking about
Right.
outcomes here.
Correct.
That's exactly right.
What I'm saying is that there's an assumption here being made here that the standards, the implementation of the standards, and consistent implementation of the standards in all classrooms will result in this outcome measure. And there's one of two possibilities there. It may have nothing to do with it. It may make a big difference. It may make no difference. There may be other things that make that difference. You're assuming that taking this action, the strategy that you're carrying out now is putting these standards in place. And through the balanced scorecard, we want to have a leading indicator that allows you to test that assumption. And that's what I'm trying to drive at here, is the idea that do we know? First of all, we need to know that that's actually happened in all classrooms. If you feel that the reports from the individual districts are all consistent, and that's valid data that you can take to the bank and say, yes, I know from those assertions that every single classroom has changed their behavior.
BJ?
I think this aligns more with the teacher evaluations is how, I don't know if we can mandate that somehow, to where when my principal comes into my room, she says, yes, BJ's teaching to the standards, he has a listed in his room, he has this. I think
the
the
observation
implementation
process.
falls on me. I think we keep saying the standard implementation falls on the classroom teacher. And I think the only way to evaluate that would be the teacher evaluations, and it's something that every single school is doing, every single teacher is doing. Maybe we amend our teacher evaluations, say that it has to have this kind of data in it that says.
Part of the
we're teaching to
observations.
Well,
One of the things that we're wanting to gather information on, and you'll see it later back, is that what kind of the teacher red flag, that obviously we need to be looking at curriculum. But teachers are required within their evaluation system to actually teach the curriculum, aligned to the standards. I mean, that's in every teacher evaluation piece.
so let me give you a better example of what I'm getting at. I think you're on the right track, but I think where I'm saying is that we need a system. For example, I would say you have to create a system whereby you can guarantee that districts are creating compliant evaluation models, that include the weightings that we've talked about that are in RISE 2.0, so that there's a system in place where somebody goes and says, yes, that is a compliant teacher evaluation system, because you're right, you've got diversity in terms of some are doing RISE, some are doing RISE Lake, some are doing TAB, but there is some language in there about certain expectations about those systems aligning to certain ideals
Things
that
we
we're.
want student learning outcomes, it'd be good to keep that.
What was spelled out, because if you don't do that, then you can only say that we've created a teacher effective system, a teacher evaluation system we believe is effective. But if you're not creating a monitoring to make sure they're compliant, you have no idea to what degree there's fidelity in which you executed that out as a strategy. So that's what I'm thinking in terms of a strategy. It's not dictating to them whether they do TAP or RISE or RISE. It's just saying that when you do it,
This
that
element.
somebody's
component.
reviewing it here to say that's really happening, and we're not surprised because we know that there
And
are.
the communication from the board about that priority goes out. So it's systemic, it's a systematic
That's exactly right.
implementation. Sarah, or-
Before we go,
Yeah,
Dan, before we go on, can I get you to state that in the form of a strategy for
Yeah,
goal one?
You create an effective monitoring system that evaluates the teacher evaluation systems of each school district and ensures that it's compliant with, and it's sort of getting too wordy, but somebody can
No,
whittle it
you're,
down, but can make sure that it's compliant with the established guidelines issued by the board with respect to RISE 2.0.
especially
also-
we wanted at least 50.
It also supports what we were talking about early on, I think at the beginning of the meeting, which is ongoing assessment.
right.
If we were to just to look at the career planning test, whatever that's called, sorry, or ISTEP or whatever it is, on an annual basis, we're missing that ongoing assessment.
Right.
So by getting that data along the way, we can
Sure.
pretty much see within a month or two or three whether or not we're headed down the wrong path of meeting that particular
Gotcha.
objective.
Okay.
And so I would support it for that reason, also that notion of ongoing assessment in the dashboard.
Part of the
2.0
teacher observation
guidelines.
process and part of the
Yeah.
teacher evaluation process.
I would even look at a strategy that says the board, State Board of Education, will ask the department to bring forth to the board and the board staff process, calendar, timelines, accountability, resources required, human and financial, for communicating and delivering education support for the new standards, for professional evaluation that are consistent. So we see the communication plan. Okay, this is what's going on at this. So I would like to see, if we wanted a strategy with this that make it more likely we will achieve those goals, I want to see who's going to do it, how much resources required, where's the timeline, where's the communication pieces, and then we have in the board packet that this is, first of all, design, and then is it achieve these things, and there's a systematic implementation of teaching the new standards, what's the professional development strategy, what resources do you need in the budget? If this is a big priority of the board, we're going to get achievement out, then we better know where the resources, and there's a plan, and there's a timeline, and then when we meet, we can say, here's the update on that timeline behind these big goals.
And
we
that-
know who's doing it.
Okay, and that replaces the first 1, 2, 3.
So are we on the first one?
8.
Because we've been talking all over the place.
Calculated covers the first 8 of these.
Yeah.
three,
Yes.
4, 5,
And that's
7,
what, these
8.
are all piecemeal like to-do
Yeah.
lists. These are
You
tactical.
just summed it up, I think.
I want a strategy. I want, yeah, I want the process from the department, and we certainly, the board staff could be part of it, that shows me as a board member what we're trying to get done, who's going to do it, what resources are needed, what's the timeline, and a way we can check implementation. That would be a strategy to get this done.
Yeah.
And the-
For what? For all of this? Like everything in one?
I heard
For the
CCR
standards.
Yeah. First of
CCR.
all, we have
Oh,
no
just the
standard.
very first one on standards?
Well,
That would take about
First
8
page.
actually, I think, Linda, that there's, it really, what he said covers the first 8 of these.
Right.
Relative to CCR.
Because your valuation tools
Where
looking
there's
at,
pages of them.
That's the problem.
The first
So-
8 on this page.
very first page.
And maybe some of the others, I haven't looked at the other pages yet.
But
Another way to look at that, Dan, is that in a sense, you just described a project that would be put in support to make sure and the way typically we deal with it under the balanced scorecard is say, okay, that's the next step. That's a project to fire that thing up when you start talking about processes and schedules and all that sort of stuff.
The only
laying
reason
that
I'm
plan
putting
out.
under, I agree with you. The only reason I put under strategy is because we're saying basically our strategy to make sure the new standards are implemented.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that we would get this.
Is
What
to
is
do
going
that
to be the
piece of work.
process? What are going to be the resources required? What folks are going to be put on this? If it's a priority of the board, I want to know we're putting muscle on this thing.
Mhm.
Because I want to drive the numbers. And I want to know what the communication is going out, so it has fidelity with what we intended. And it would be multifaceted, but it would be a process for implementing with substance.
Well,
A lot of projects within it.
Yeah.
But the strategy is that we get it, we can monitor its implementation, and we know the timeline. And if the timeline's going to match up with driving the outcome.
Dan, I see what you just said as part of the infrastructure, the heart of the dashboard. And so I don't see it as a project or this or that. I see it as a key ingredient of it, that we are being informed, that we're getting updates and so forth and so on. So it's an infrastructure issue that's critical to the effective running of the dashboard.
What you're doing in the field aligns to what the state of Indiana has said. And when you look at the evaluation system, it does look at mastery of standards. It looks at performance of teaching. It looks at how you're addressing academic need. It looks at how you're doing professional development through teachers. I would submit all 4 of those things feed into some kind of impact on your overall student achievement. So as a strategy, if you were saying we have to have a system that looks at that, it's going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to ensure it's being done. But I kind of like what you were saying earlier. If there's data coming back in to the department and somebody's verifying it's compliant, you see that data, you're going to be able to very quickly to identify where your model schools are at, which then you get a really nice effect, because now you can start identifying these schools are exceptional at how they manage those constructs. And so what can we learn from them? And we start to help other schools come along in that process as well.
So would you also include in that the implementation of the new assessment?
Are we back to talking about the goal, or are you talking about a strategy specific to the CCR standards?
The strategy that Dan articulated relative to CCR standards.
I think that's probably a secondary strategy in terms of it gets into what Sarah's been talking about in the board meetings about making sure we're implementing the standards with a high degree of fidelity, and what kind of resources are we allocating to that, what's happening. I think the evaluation system can look at it to a certain point, but, and I may not be completely.
You cannot, the system's large. So if we communicate a strategy, there's going to be a system, and then we publish it. We have a calendar, timeline, and here's the message from the board, then down through the superintendent staff, local superintendents, local boards. For instance, let's go back to RISE. 50% of the evaluation, student learning outcomes. We're driving student learning outcomes. We want proficiency. We want to eliminate the gaps. So we're going to measure it. So if you have a different mousetrap, go ahead. But then we see the communication was clear. We have goals, they're very clear, we measure them, we have a strategy to get there. There's been clear communication, we have a timeline was communicated, the board and everybody's on the same page. So I think there is one on assessment, and I think there's one on the standards. That way we have some sense of hand in glove operation, and the ability to achieve in those environments goes way up, exponentially. When there's confusing messages sent out, pieces and parts, people throw up their hands and do their own thing or nothing. It's leadership.
And that plan all those items that you just articulated should satisfy.
One in line.
All right, so we've just finished the first page. We've come up with 2 strategies, one for standards, one for assessment. We also addressed the strategy at the top of the next page, the aligning Indiana's school accountability system. I think that's addressed under what you just talked about. The next one begins to deal with turnaround principles and the implementation of the turnaround program.
And this one where I would say, based on what I saw in Teresa's presentation, I think the system maybe just getting the dashboard up and running so that when we're having meetings and the turnaround providers in front of us, we're seeing that dashboard populated and they're talking from that and we're actually using it. So the strategy there may actually be not so much to create the system, but for the board to utilize the system in concert with the turnaround providers as they're coming before the board on a regular basis.
To support that, now we have a common template. I thought that was a major step forward, and we
Right.
can do comparative data. And so I
Okay, so collapse those around turnaround into that monitoring system. You mentioned a dashboard. You have a dashboard for the turnaround schools?
There wasn't the one we were looking at with the mayor's office. I'm trying to go off memory. I know Teresa showed us.
This
something.
is not really the turnaround schools.
Right.
So this is taking the system that we've created, and I agree with Brad. You know, it's just getting the right information tracked on a consistent basis. It's almost like monitoring our monitoring system, so to speak. So
Seen it, so I know that system is. I had a chance to look through that handout we got last meeting. It was very good.
Okay, so I'm going to impose upon one of you to articulate a strategy here that would encompass this.
I'd say operationalize and expand the scope of the current monitoring systems to measure.
to monitor,
Yeah.
focus and priority school improvement. Because that's
Yeah.
really what it is.
Yeah. Good tag team.
Do we want to include anything about being accepted for the flexibility waiver in that or not? Or is that not right?
I
Say
guess.
that
It's in place that's acceptable by the DOE.
Well, that's our job, to be working with the Department of Education to be sure that we do. So I think a lot of this conversation today is revolving around trust with the department. And I'm going to assume that once that trust is finally there, that we will be having some conversation that moves us forward a little bit quicker.
It might be about trust, but actually,
Is it right for our kids?
systems and processes, you don't have to rely on a feeling of trust. It builds in a way of operating that increases exponentially likelihood that you'll actually achieve the desired outcome. So a strategy puts forth a way in which there's clear timelines and things that will be done systematically. So it isn't just, well, I just know old Joe and Joe will come through. But, I mean, I trust the pilot, but I appreciate pilots that follow the system before takeoff, and they do it every time with great fidelity,
A
and it
checklist.
ensures really great safety record of getting people up in the air and back down safely. So when I'm doing something like running on almost $10 billion operation, I want a strategy that speaks to the important parts of a systemic, accountable, we did these things, these were the resources required, this is what was done, and it's just very systematic, it's consistent.
Repeatable
So
year
trust
after year.
is a good thing, and I wouldn't actually speak against it, but I would add this to it, and our outputs will grow exponentially.
Well, there's a couple other terms that float around in my mind: credibility, discernment. Those go hand in hand. Trust is an outgrowth of those things. But I think, to your point, when I look at the things in here, I would say, setting the waiver aside, is it good for Indiana? And I think we would say yes. That's a good thing to be monitoring how we do school turnaround. And so, from that standpoint, I don't know that it has to necessarily address that waiver per se, in as much as just saying that we got to operationalize, expand
Sure,
those things in
we
there.
should.
Move us along. That was very helpful. I think we have three major strategies here. One I want to draw your attention to is the use of providing data to school districts to partly operationalize what you're just talking about, a monitoring system, so that you actually have some data coming in that informs you of what's going on. But also, what we're seeing in a lot of other states is the State Department beginning to provide services around instructional improvement systems. Systems that the districts can't afford to buy on their own necessarily, particularly your medium to small districts. But the states are beginning to acquire instructional delivery systems, digital content, online learning capabilities, to move school districts into the digital world. Doing so without the state doing it, each district has to issue RFPs, purchase content, and it's hugely expensive. The vendors love it and make a lot of money at it. North Carolina is doing it. Not that they do everything right. Massachusetts is doing it. Ohio, Arizona, Kentucky. A lot of the leading states are really taking this as an initiative. It helps them to move in the direction of, accomplishing their goals around student achievement. Helps to align the content to standards, because you're now providing digital content. You don't tell them, here's what you teach. Here you're telling them, here is some content that's aligned to the standards that you can use if you want, or if you want to select your own. So that's one that fits in here. I'm not sure that you're ready this year to do that, but it's something to put on the plate to begin to think about.
Rick, in terms of that would be a visionary piece of leadership there, and I think we would need to get a task force with people that are seeing a new really way to deliver engaged learning using technology and systems. And I think our best strategy there would be appoint a high-end task force, and we could approve the members because a lot of the back office operations behind this delivery, if each district figures it out, it's not going to be hugely expensive. It won't work together once we get there.
Right.
And we'll waste an awful lot of time. We would need to think about this and come up with a bold vision about what do you do across.
Well, that's a strategy. I mean, that's
that
fine
would-
as a strategy.
And so this is like all new, to me at least. So were these specific things suggested somewhere along the way? I didn't.
I think even-
I did what?
And what we would suggest that are things that you should consider. So
Because
this
I
is,
would agree with Dan, this is something that's a ways off.
sure.
Hopefully not too far, but we'd get started on it with our.
In terms of a lot of things, in terms of funding to even look at it, in terms of, I just would say that this is a ways off.
Right, but
Go ahead. Greg.
my experience, and I work someplace that if we don't innovate, we don't exist in 5 years because we don't have any public aid. So it is about innovation. So from a strategy standpoint, I don't know if it's a task force, but I'm just thinking about those STEM areas and that career education piece. Is there a happy medium in there that's visionary, realistic, strategic, that could be measured in a way that the board is at least offering some strategy for, to say we may not have it all there right now, but whether that's the creation of a task force to continue to study it, that we not lose sight of it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we don't have a metric yet to measure it in a larger goal. I do think, I'd hate to see us not have some strategy addressing some of these, including the thing you were saying about career ed, because we've talked before about a clearinghouse of best practices and really trying to make that. And I don't know how that happens unless we put it in and say, strategically, this needs to be happening.
Along with
Yes.
a few helpers, and the concept being is to get ahead, to have something that's an aspirational kind of goal.
Right.
And I'm looking for something in the middle between waiting and jumping in immediately for all
Right.
school districts. I'd like to see some kind of a strategy that talks about maybe a pilot program of some kind to take 20, 30, 40 districts who are interested in this to start out, get our feet wet with technology integration. There's a lot of states that are way ahead of us. And I feel we're 5, 10 years behind already. And so I would certainly strongly encourage us to have a strategy in there to create a pilot program that would engage, I'll throw out a number, 30 school districts that we get rolling in as maybe these districts would be the exemplary examples that others could aspire to.
Well, if that's what you're talking about, because I'm reading these differently. So if you're talking about instructional embedding of technology, oh my gosh, I should have brought my e-learning group with me because we've got one-to-one going on all over the state of Indiana with very clear guidelines and expectations as to what that looks like and how that's developed. So in fact, we have a very robust program piece going on with that. I guess that's not what I thought I was looking at here. So if that's what we're looking at, we are on our way with that.
Right.
No problem. I guess I was reading in other things in here. So
Can I comment on that?
maybe they're not worded well.
Eminent state for innovative instructional practices through full and meaningful technology integration in all learning environments. And so, yes, I know, I mean, there's some of my congressional district that I think are really exemplary, but this notion of coordinating it statewide, provide maybe some additional resources to share this among other districts.
If I would, very good, David. If I was going to go back to try to make this clear, We want to drive learning outcomes and achievement. What can we do together to create platforms and systems using technology and new methods that drive learning outcomes for all groups? So in other words, we can take the system we know now and keep getting incremental pops, or we can study some kind of a collective response to the challenge of driving learning for all groups of students that improves engagement, focus, delivery, incorporates every benefit technology has to offer. And I appreciate the pockets and I appreciate the projects. That would be a project to do a group, and there's groups out there. I'm saying looking at it from a statewide, a systemic approach to rethinking how we deliver education with a special focus on incorporating technology and shared investments and shared processes and shared platforms. You will get there again much faster.
That's right.
Exponential return on investments as opposed to purely like popcorn popping up. The popcorn is kind of neat because you get some neat innovation, but if we could create a platform and find out ways to advance learning, to have students that are behind catch up, people excel at new levels we didn't think were possible by use of technology, engaged learning, new systems, and had some platform for them. I'm talking about some lead from our level that gets a better return on investment. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
We'll take a shot at appointing a task force to study the movement into digital learning and use of pilot programs and that sort of building upon the existing e-learning that's occurring and that sort of thing.
They'll advance these lagging indicators.
The best of these align your standards and your assessments with formative and classroom and provide that feedback all the way back to the teacher on a weekly basis based on the assessments the assessment items you selected out of the assessment item bank. Here's where your children are relative to the standards, here's where you need some remediation. So the best of them are actually giving data back to the teachers on a regular basis, really tight cycle basis. And
I want to be sure the strategy isn't to form a task force. That's not the strategy. The strategy is to catapult technology as a primary instructional tool in all our schools. So, I mean, there's a huge difference. I mean, we all create task forces and we never hear from them again, potentially.
Right. I just wanted
So-
some groups studying it to go to some of these really brilliant people that are working on it and some outside people. That's more of a, I suppose, a tactic, the task force.
tactic. Well, the strategy then is probably best worded as it is here.
I would agree with that.
And-
I'd like to keep
and then
the
this-
wording the way it is, and then
the
how we
project-
do that is a tactic.
The project is the task force.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that-
Thank you. I
Yeah.
think that's right.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, good distinction.
I just want to add to that, because I appreciate the comments from a system standpoint, because that's where you start getting into economies of scale, when you start trying to scale some things out. But what I don't want to have lost in here is whatever the vehicle is by which that gets done, is that the difference between what Superintendent's talking about, what you may be articulating, because both are needed, is at this level, at the board level, it's what are the core assumptions that are going to drive the creation of systems. That's what our strategy should be with that goal. And so if we have any kind of a group, I won't use the word task force, but a study group or whatever, look at it, the strategy for us should be is clearly articulated state level core assumptions that drive what we believe about either.
As a deliverable back, then you start forming a vision that will bring investment and it will bring even new projects, maybe by service districts or something. But
Yep. And
that's what I want here. I
understand.
want to give clear direction that we move on it and not have an interesting
Sure.
study group or discussion group.
And that's where the whole operationalizing of this begins to occur. We would turn your task force thing idea into a project. And you can carry this same thought forward into the project team and telling the project team what you want. And then you're looking at the things that come back, so that there's a full circle connection between the kernel of thought that you just had all the way down to the execution. And we can perhaps even give you a sample of what a project charter for this thing might look like as part of what we're doing.
Do you think we should move on to our second?
We should, but I don't want to leave until we finish a couple of other things on this
Okay,
one.
what are they?
Do you need similar to this task force for digital learning?
Same thing on character ed.
Same thing on character ed.
I think so. That's what I was getting at, to Sarah's point.
Yeah.
At this point,
That's what I
if
want.
we don't say something in here, we won't ever do it. And I think it's along the same lines of this other issue. So
Okay.
it's-
What about STEM? Are you where you want to be with STEM? Or
I think the larger STEM issue is going to come up in the second goal, and I don't know if it did, but it's, do you have enough secondary content specialists to really grow STEM?
okay, so
And that
STEM
gets into
becomes
human
a goal
resource side of
two.
it, Yeah.
Okay, so
But I'm one person, but when I think about that issue, I mean, in goal one, I'm worried about from the standpoint of, do we have a way to measure career readiness standards? I hope so when we're done, we're supposed to. I'm more worried about STEM as it relates to a human resource issue. Do we have enough
Got it.
teachers qualified to pull it off?
we'll put that under goal 2, CTE. Are you where you want to be with CTE, or is that an area of focus that you need here? You really wanting to ramp up that program? Yes? Okay.
And I think, I have a question on this, if I could, because this is one of the things we talked about at one of the very first meetings. At what point will our balanced scorecard be squared against other areas? I mean, I think about Jackie's work right now over on the career innovation side of CCI. We had talked about that, and I'm not limiting it just to the career innovation folks. I mean, I don't know what all governmental entities we need to look at, but they're all developing strategic plans.
At
So
some point, we have to meld, it would seem under the leadership of the governor, because then you have career, you have higher ed, and you have K-12. And I don't know how many billions are spent on all that, but it's many. And then you have a clear plan between all the entities, how the human resource in Indiana is going to be stellar, which will attract investment, higher paying jobs. It will be the place where you absolutely want to be.
So
But you can't work, at some point, there'll have to be that synthesis.
yeah, we don't want to duplicate the work. There's been, you've told me there's been a lot of good work there, so why don't we leverage that and reference it or support it or link to it somehow?
Things that Career Council is getting ready to have a final strategic plan, and the focus of that is CTE. And that's taking the work from the regional works councils and rolling that out. In addition, there's a task force on STEM that's happening there, so.
And I agree with that, because I mean, we could sit here and try and do a brain up, think of things. Where I hope this thing eventually goes, and I'm seeing this now, I see the beginning pieces of it. When I used to sit in central office and we used to think about career technical education, the programming issues that got expanded weren't necessarily because of data coming from workforce telling us there was a market. It was because people were sitting there going, hey, we could put a dental lab in, or hey, we could put a cosmetology lab in, or hey, we could, I mean, I really hope eventually where we're going is, if we do share these plans, if we got real data coming from a region saying we can't fill jobs, the question ought to become, at the education side of it, what are we doing to graduate people into these jobs? So I don't know what to write there, coordination, maybe that's the strategy, is coordinating with the workforce side of this, but that's my
I don't know
thought.
where that strategy comes in, but at some point, our body of work, we have to sit down with governor's people, Claire,
Yeah.
your office is basically the
It's goal 3.
entity where it comes in, it's goal 3, and we all join hands, and we're working one direction, it'll be more powerfully actually than ever.
Right. All right, so anything else that is a big rock item strategy for achieving the objective in goal 1? Anything that's top of mind? Moving along. Goal 2.
So back on goal 1, not to having heard the conversation to begin with regarding our balanced scorecard at the front end. So are we wanting these literacy goals here? Are we wanting the graduation without waiver? Are we wanting the
That was my question. Do you
character
want
and
to, which of
citizenship
these
that's
do
written in
you?
here? Are we wanting?
We said character and citizenship.
Yeah, but what's written in here is tying it into workplace ethics that we might do at the career end as well, not just along the way in the curriculum.
Sir?
I think we had worded it, though, that if we were able to come up with a measure, the request was made to look into appropriate measures that could be used, standardized across the state. And if we can, we would leave it there. If not, it would fall down to a strategy. That was my understanding of where we left it.
Sure, but there's some things written in here, I guess I'm wanting to
Right.
know, are we keeping them, what are we doing with them?
Let's go through them.
I mean, I just don't feel like we finished this section.
The only other thing we just did say, though, when the recipients of our students that we educate go out into the field, we're getting some workforce material. What kind of ethics, what kind of character traits can they work in teams that are, and that would
Okay, I think we keep the strategy on character and citizenship. That was your question. The ones on STEM,
So you think you've encompassed these somehow within the other strategies that we've just talked about?
to a large degree, Linda, I think we have, without sitting here and going through every one of them.
Okay.
Are there some, and I don't mean to cut these out.
No, if you
Are there
think that
some
they're somewhere in there, then I'll see them later.
Well, I would say they're either somewhere in there, or we're getting the impression that there are some of these that are too fine-grained to be on your balanced
That's where I was gonna go.
scorecard.
It
And
has,
that's why, I guess that's why I brought it up. How are we determining that?
Well, my assumption is if someone hasn't mentioned them specifically this
Is
morning,
there
that
one
they
that
are
you want in
too
the
fine-grained.
No, there were
strategy?
just several that we hadn't talked about at all, so I just wanted to.
that's where you'd cover the literacy, because I agree these are important as they're written, but they're very granular. This gets into the local autonomy to decide how to really ensure literacy. I mean, we're saying things like students will be instructed in a research-based model for literacy. I absolutely agree with that. Would I put it in a state balanced scorecard? Probably not because it's not important, but the granularity of it, it's more appropriate at a local level. If I was going to look at a local balanced scorecard, I could see that. I would want to see the larger state system being that we're resourcing those things to happen to address literacy, but I think that maybe we're
Well, I'm fine with that. I just
More
want
up
to be sure
into-
that everything we've.
Teams were doing and what the board was doing. And to the extent the goal teams were seeing things from a more granular, more DOE-based point of view, and you guys are looking at it from a slightly different point of view. And so some of these things that were suggested, put on here as suggestions, may not be appropriate. I think that's what I'm hearing, is that you don't feel that they're necessarily appropriate to be on your
I
scorecard.
wouldn't use the word that they're not appropriate. That concerns me a little bit
Right.
because I think it's important to hear from them. I just think it's the difference that they're working in the field, they're working at the LA level. So if I'm sitting there with them, I'm going to be thinking that way. When you bring it back to this level, it informs that larger state level view because now we're going out to a different ceiling level.
Mhm.
And if you don't, what happens is, and I've seen this happen with the balanced scorecard, is it'll be like 60 pages long and nobody uses it because it's too heavy to carry
It's too
around.
heavy to carry around, yeah. Okay. let's-
David?
Would it be fair to say we did not eliminate anything? Because as I went through the multiple ones, I'm up to that level. And the detail level, frankly, we don't need to be concerned about because that's going to happen at the local level.
Yep.
So I think people, if they're watching out there or paying attention, we have not said, that wasn't a good idea.
Right.
We've incorporated everything into it.
Well put.
They'll handle it at that detail level, and we'll handle it at a policy level.
Well
Is that a
put.
fair
That's
statement?
very well put. Much more tactfully than I
There's
could
some
have said.
synthesis that went on here, and we're doing it a different level.
Moving along to goal 2.
Thank you. Indiana will recruit, develop, and retain top-notch educational leaders.
Yes. I was so bold as to suggest basically 2 measures here. The distribution of teacher ratings. You might even take that to correlation with school grades, I don't know. And then school grades themselves. I think somebody said earlier, really, the numbers in goal 1 tell you how well you're doing in goal 2. And school grades is sort of the roll-up of much of that we talked about. So I'm maintaining and that the distribution of teacher ratings is informative to this body as you look at those and ask questions about those and look at other data. Those are your best lagging indicators.
So now the statute requires us to collect data in aggregate form for certified employees.
Uh-huh.
So all of our teacher ratings
Mhm.
include everybody. So it includes your teachers, your principals, and your superintendents.
So you don't break them out, the numbers out?
Not according to how we're supposed to collect the data.
Yeah.
How you collect it and then how we use it and disaggregate could be 2 different subjects, correct?
I hear Glenda
Well,
saying
it's not
that
disaggregated.
you can't disaggregate it.
We're supposed to collect it in aggregate form. Is that correct, Deb?
Actually, legislation changed on that. We're collecting it at the SBOE level, so we're collecting it by educators.
So we can disaggregate it now? Okay.
Internally, we don't.
Oh, internally.
Report it out in the aggregate. That's required. But internally, we have.
Public information.
Yeah, we have to look, because it's very specific how we have to report it out.
I'm not talking about reporting it out to the public, I'm talking about reporting it internally to State Board of Education members.
Well,
You're
and-
saying you collect the data, and the question is it accessible to Board of Education members?
that anything we send to you is public.
Well, there's different ways to send it to us. You don't have to hand it to us in a public meeting. There could be an internal way to. So the answer is no, you will not share it with Board of Ed?
No, I
Oh,
don't
okay.
know. We don't know if we can. I mean, we don't know.
We can explore options to do an MOU. And ensure that it would fall within one of the exceptions under public access.
What,
Probably possible to get that data.
I'm lost.
Yeah,
I'm not getting why aggregate data on teacher effectiveness would be a privacy issue.
Well, disaggregate it, if it raised any, if you had, if it became, if you had ends of fewer than 10, right? It would become
We can do that on a scorecard anyways. It's too granular.
Frank, we don't need personally identified, well, I
Right.
don't want it, we don't need it. What we
No.
need to know, though,
Categories.
if you have an F school and everybody's highly effective, there's a dissonance there, there's a problem, right? That's hard to understand, it's hard to comprehend. So what we need, we would look for appropriate data to help us understand, and a strategy to make sure it's according to our guidelines, 50% student learning, et cetera.
That's
So
exactly right.
make sure there's no confusion on that this time.
Yep.
Because I think it would help us with the Department of Education.
Oh, this is one you probably won't have a target for, right? You're looking for you're using the data, you're reviewing the data to try to draw conclusions about how well it's working, but you may not have a target for it, right?
Can I just
Go ahead.
suggest there may be some other metrics that we want to think about, and I don't know who all was involved with this, but having just finished up PEDS and working with Tana Mansfield at the department and getting Title II and all that filed, if we're serious about the potential human talent, I think we better start looking at a metric that's looking at things like who's enrolling in our schools, because the enrollment numbers are down across the state exponentially. I mean, they are way down, and not only that, but when you start mining that data,
You're talking about schools of
I'm
ed?
talking about when you talk about Indiana will recruit, develop, and retain top-notch educational leaders. If you look at the PEDS data right now that schools of education have to turn in on who they've enrolled, not only is the number down, but if you look at it demographically as to the demographic profile of the student the other day, that's one of the issues they're dealing with. I can tell you that, and I'm not just talking about my institution. I'm telling you, anybody can get up on PEDS and look at it statewide. But I hear people all the time talking about, well, we better, and I do think a retention rate is another metric we ought to look at. And people look at that, they're looking at retirement rates. But I think retirement rate's the wrong metric to look at. I think it's an important one. They look at that and they start screaming teacher shortage because they see everybody retiring. I scream teacher shortage because I don't see anybody enrolling. So I just would suggest there may be some other metrics here along, if we're serious about recruiting, development, and retaining, that would inform the board and give at least a better shared understanding amongst the board members as to what really is the situation in Indiana with regards to the next generation of teachers coming into the profession, and maybe even start to inform what we're doing to put strategies in place to recruit and retain.
What's the outcome you're trying to achieve here? You want more people in schools of ed?
I'd like to see us recruit greater diversity. I'd like to see the numbers be up, but I'd really like to see us get a more diverse pool of candidates coming into the profession. I'm not sure we really understand that, and if I had that as a metric, I could down the road see argue that it does.
Okay.
The
Well, I'm
professional,
asking the
the
question
Professional
sincerely.
Standards Advisory Board was collapsed and it came here, and this is the body that approves programs. I'm saying that from the standpoint of a program. We're concerned about the diversity of students going into that program, but
Well, minimally,
Teresa, you disagree?
it's,
because it is, but can I push back on that gently? I don't know where the state partnership
Character
agreement.
education.
I say that because I don't know the status of the state partnership agreements with national accrediting bodies. But there is a standard around diversity that in terms of a partnership agreement. But if you don't do that, we've always had a state review process at the department that looked at the same standard. So my pushback on that is I'm just simply saying you're not going to improve diversity unless you make it an important issue. I'm not saying it should be the issue. I'm just saying if we're saying that the board has no say over that, sure you do. You get to decide whether or not institutions get to recommend people for a teaching license. You have a lot of control over that. So that's simply all I'm saying on that. I'm not saying it should be the issue. Counselor's going to tell me I'm totally wrong, but if she does, I'm going to tell her that she has to come up and follow my SPA reports this fall.
To encourage diversity that the Supreme Court has limited the flexibility that was given to Grutter. There are going to be additional challenges in encouraging diverse student bodies now.
minimally, though, it's an example of how two state agencies need to work together. We should be working with the Board of Higher Ed with this, and I think it's a great example of how we can work together in the best interest of Indiana children. So I would suggest, I don't know if they have their own strategic plan, but if they do, I would look to that document first to see if there's kind of a strategy, and maybe we adopt their strategy into our document to make it clear that we need both agencies working together.
I'm just I don't think a strategy necessarily breaks law. I think it's an
State's a
intentionality.
lagging indicator for us.
I think you can basically track the data coming back off of PEDS, off of what is the nature of the cancer enrollment. Are we seeing that? On our Title II report, for example, every teacher preparation program in Indiana on its Title II report right now has to talk about what they're doing to recruit more people into STEM areas, recruit more students of diversity into the profession.
I agree with you, by the way. We have great numbers, but part of it's because where we live. I mean, it's just geography is part of it. So,
I'm just raising, I just think there are other metrics we might want to look at if we're serious about retention and recruitment.
so would you have a lagging indicator, say how many, what would you help me articulate or help, put a proposal on the floor.
You could link it directly to accreditation of that university to be able to recruit, retain, and prepare school teachers and school principals.
Talking
a
about a
lagging
strategy.
indicator, so
I guess we're blending two things. I was looking at the metrics, not the strategies yet. Strategies are coming.
No,
here
I
in a
don't want the
second.
strategy. I want the metric.
So all I'm
It's a
saying is for a
lagging
metric, if you're saying that that what you're measuring is how you recruit and how you develop, well, recruit and develop happens at the pre-service level. And so I'm just saying, as I look at that, and you got distribution of teacher ratings, there's nothing in there that we're gathering right now at the pre-service level that would help inform the board.
Are we going to be gathering retention?
Okay. I think I just saw the disconnect for me. I think there's two different ways you look at the word recruit. I think hearing that, the word recruit here is being used as recruit is in recruiting them into the actual in-service profession and hang on to them. I was thinking one step back from that, like how do you even recruit them into the training
But if
pathway?
we measure as a board the retention and diversity of our teacher workforce and principal workforce, and we set a metric there, then there might be a strategy to work with higher ed, there might be to state, so then we can develop strategies to get it. But I don't want to state a strategy for higher ed because we don't have responsibility over them. What do we want in our teacher workforce is what I hear you saying. So how would you state that? And then we can work on strategy to work with all sorts of people. That's, by the way, gently and friendly stated.
well, what's
thinking-
currently being reported, maybe we can start there because I'm a little concerned that or other reports we get already.
We turn in enrollment. Are we talking about first year teaching or are we talking about coming into the profession?
Let's talk about what we're responsible for, K-12
K-12.
education. What does our educator workforce look like in the state of Indiana? What do you want it to look like? Because that would be the lagging indicator. Then we could start working with schools of ed and do all sorts of things. But until we know the metric, we can't really.
So you have a DOE CE or Certified Personnel or CP report, so you know we can track them back where they came from. We have some information on them.
Here, so while we don't collect direct retention information, we can tell if that educator returns to a specific school or district every year by looking at this historical C data.
Mhm.
So we do have that information, but we don't have exact retention.
Indicator and they need help from the legislature or others to figure out how we measure it. I mean, do we want to increase the diversity and we want to create the diversity of and retention of professional educators in the state of Indiana by X? We have to find out where we're at, or can we estimate where we're at, or where we do? how deficient are we against the ideal? I just don't know, so it's hard to put a lagging indicator down.
Yeah, and I've never been one to like the
For that, and that becomes part of your strategy. I mean, we have that, we're required to do that now, but I don't know that we measure it well. We talk a lot about it. We talk about culturally responsive teaching, but I don't know what the metrics are. I just know that there is a real disconnect between when you look at the needs and the makeup of the students we serve and the teachers trying to teach to that.
What
That
if you,
that can
what
be
if you had a
sort of
lagging
challenge.
indicator that says, we will make, over a 5-year period, a 10% improvement in having the professional educator workforce reflect the demographics of the population in Indiana? That will be very hard to do because the Hispanic, I don't even know if it's possible. Hispanic Latinos growing so fast and various groups that we would have to have a major push and some very remarkable strategies to pull it off, I would think. But we could think of it that way if you like, and let retention, we could work a different way. But if we wanted the professional educator workforce to look like the population to work at
So can we couch this in terms of a strategy to look at the recruiting practices and to move the numbers to match the diversity of the state in the teacher ranks?
The
Something
lagging
of that.
indicator would be to
So-
move the diversity of to
Yeah.
match the
So you do
population.
want a lagging indicator?
So the goal is that we're going to recruit, develop, and retain top-notch educational leaders.
Right.
And so on this page, I'm not sure of the breakout for character, scholarship, and leadership and how that fits with what we got going on here. I mean, we want them to be good leaders. But I know the goal groups struggled with what does that mean, and were we supposed to find indicators in each one of these areas, and how's that supposed to look? So that in itself is kind of confusing. To me, this goal speaks to developing your highly effective educators, whether because the larger the pool of our highly effective, the more we can have effect on the rest of the teaching pool,
Based on what?
based upon them taking leadership roles, doing what they need to be doing within schools.
How about what's the role of student learning outcomes? Is that how we judge them as effective?
Well, that's one measure for sure. Of course we do.
To me, this becomes another issue of the self-reported data as well, and making the prophecy that you set forth with. And I'm wondering if there isn't some way that we can word it through. I know a lot of the conversation that's taken place related to recent numbers of teacher effectiveness that came out was discrepancy between school and district grade versus the number of teachers that were rated effective or ineffective. And I'm wondering if there isn't some way that we can measure more of a matchup of the amount of effective teachers matches where the letter grade falls. I'd like to see some way that we can make sure that we're ensuring that it's not just, again, for the sake of making sure I meet my goal, that I have X amount at this level. Obviously, I'm hopeful that we have highly effective everywhere. But I think it's more important for us to find a way to mesh that.
To begin with, between the metrics that we put in for the letter grades and the actual teacher quality that's there.
Well, the issue here is highly effective teacher gets results, student learning outcomes,
Well, in
correct?
in the information that I gave you,
Those connect, right?
there is a connection. There's two connections that I saw that were a trend, really, in from A schools to F schools. So the first trend was that in A schools, because we disaggregated that information out for you, there were 32% highly effective teachers. And it got lower and lower and lower and lower and lower capacity of the leadership that you need there to bring about the change that you need to bring about. You do in some schools and you don't in others, and it did correlate with the grades in terms of highly effective teachers. When you combine that with the ineffective and the needs improvement category, when you disaggregated it out by the grades of the schools, it was a and the F schools was almost 20% combined with those groups. So when you looked at it from the A to F, which I was very interested in doing because I wanted to see if there were correlations in any particular way, and it was happening in the retention area, and it was happening in the highly effective educators and utilizing their talents that they have within leadership
What
roles within
percent
our
of,
schools.
and you determine someone's highly effective, what percent of the student learning outcomes would you apply to that?
That's
The
why the
student
data's-
learning outcomes would determine that. Because if we're not consistent on that, then we'll.
Well, you're
have a lot of confusion.
asking me, Dan, to actually interpret the law. And the law
No, I'm
says
asking
it's
to
a
set
local
a standard
decision.
and communicate it clearly.
It's a local decision.
Now, and I don't know if we can sit here and hammer it out, figure it out, but I'm just saying, I think there have to be other metrics that we look at, and I didn't mean to get us steeped in the weeds on a diversity conversation, but correlation is not causation. I wouldn't say a whole lot about the data we just got back. But, you know, the reason character, scholarship, and leadership got put in here, because when you start looking at how institutions prepare teachers, and you look at NCATE's model, which is now CAPE's model, character gets at their dispositions, which are what are their habits, their values, whether or not they act like a professional. Methodology, the whole approach to being able to use assessment for learning rather than assessment of learning. So
And those are embedded in the teacher evaluation systems.
I agree. I'm not saying we don't use the teacher effectiveness rating. I'm just saying, is that enough? Is that rate all my eggs in that one basket? But
So
that's
what do you suggest?
Let me,
thinking through other metrics.
can I call time on this
Sure.
discussion? Not being the chair of this committee, but I'd like to push this to the end. This is a good discussion, and Brad, I agree there. We don't have a rich set of measures here like we need. I'm not sure we're ready to propose anything, though. Or if we can come up with a better measure ourselves, we can suggest it. But just
Could just a simplistic measure be the percentage of teachers who are highly effective, and so forth and so on? Would that be at least
Well,
a
that-
start for you to
that's in here.
help you?
Was my comment at the very start of this section, correlating these with school grades. I think that's what those two, and then the school grades for principals and superintendents are the things that I'm suggesting as the lagging indicators. And I agree with what you're saying, Brad.
Last comment, I just don't see any metrics in here that looks at the ongoing professional development of a teacher.
But I put Brad on that before we move on and table it. think now you're talking about a strategy of developing professionals, and that'd be measuring some inputs. The lagging indicators, there should be a correlation. If I have a bunch of highly effective educators, your school grade should be pretty good. Student learning outcomes on the basic test sector should be good. You can't get the results you want without a professional development, systematic approach. So if everybody agrees with the idea of table and work on it later, let's do that. But we'll have to make sure we don't mix a strategy with a lagging indicator.
Are we working on it before June 4? 'Cause then
Rick, and let me take apart your suggestion.
we only have a few days.
We're saying table the discussion when we were off track. So table the off-track discussion and get us back on task,
Yeah,
right? That's
yeah,
what you were.
right, yeah.
I mean, Dan thought so too.
So so what do
Like
we,
what?
so you want to table lagging indicators or go strategies?
I wanted to table the conversation that we were had about that. Yes, I want to move to the strategies for goal 2. I'm sorry. Y'all take me far too serious. Okay.
Of course, the first one is evaluation.
Uh-huh. Some of these are in the weeds, okay? Let's lift out the ones that we really feel like are strategic. And I would ask that you would like to see.
I think it's going to bring us right back to where we were.
I'm afraid to talk.
Because I know, because that's what these are all about.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that does concern me, and the alternative routes into the profession. I mean, we just had a major vote on that, and we didn't all agree. That doesn't mean those of us that didn't vote for the permit don't view the need to have alternative routes. One of the concerns I have is when you look at monitoring, you still ensure quality. And so I don't know, innovation strategies that innovate ways to ensure that these teachers have the dispositions and the knowledge and the skills, if those are better words than character, scholarship, and leadership. How do we know that?
Brad, is this
The strategy.
that's on this first page? That's 1, 2, 3, about 5 up from the bottom.
Sure.
Realize that we should have done that to make it easy to find. It's
This
2.1.
Here's my suggestion. What this document is saying is we're going to collect the data. I think there's a whole separate stage on what you do with the data and whether it's reliable and valid. And that's the discussion we sort of get. Not get into a discussion of what we're going to do with the data and so forth would be really helpful. Because I'm really comfortable with that first one. I think we should be collecting data from the system.
Are you talking about a strategy of collecting more data?
No, I'm talking about and then the debate or the discussion about whether that data is valid and reliable is a separate day to talk about. There's nothing unreliable or Thank you for
And
that
I
affirmation.
would say, we have a long way to go on teacher evaluation. This is the very
Definitely.
first year that everybody had to have a new system in place, and
think-
not everybody has a new system in place. We have like 60-some school districts that don't even have one in place. And how we support that. What areas do we need to grow in principal evaluation? We haven't looked at any of that. So yeah, all of these things that my department submitted on here is really taking what we have and gathering information on what it is that we need to do with it. Because we haven't provided the PD. Okay, we don't even know what the areas are yet. So it's just all new.
We don't know what
Research.
areas about what.
So I would suggest the strategy should be around collecting the data.
Correct.
As is stated here. Once we collect it, then we can have that discussion. And if we think something should be added or deleted, because it's a living document, then we can massage that. Plan to spend the night here.
So you want to have a strategy of collecting more data on teacher, principal, superintendent performance?
But when you say more data, I think we're already collecting data. And without knowing all the data we currently collect, I hate to say more. So I'd like to look at the data that we're already collecting and then make that determination whether we should be collecting more.
I hear you basically agreeing with this first
Yes.
one right here, yeah. So that one, and the best practices in research on recruitment and retaining talented teachers is a strategy that Brad was talking about earlier, I think. Is that capturing the essence of what you write, except it doesn't have a measure in here?
I mean, do we want to relook at how we're helping? We just spent 3 years, we piloted programs to help with teacher evaluation, tested them, et cetera. And then I don't think we fully implemented it.
Oh, yeah, it was very fully implemented. And then in task that you see down here partway down,
I have a very different view of it.
in task, they're developing their tools and revising their tools as they go. Keep in mind, they've only had it 1 year. I think that's what we need to keep in mind. They've only had 1 year. And everybody put things together, and now they're looking at them to make them stronger.
And then 2.3 says reduce the weight of student growth in the state model. It's 2.1, but it's really 2.3 because it didn't get numbered. So go down 3 steps, 1, 2, 3. Reduce the weight of student growth in the state model.
Twelve, 13. It's just to say that it occurred.
We're talking about strategies.
Talking about
So
strategy.
that shouldn't be in there.
That's what I was.
This is, I guess the thing I'm struggling with, Rick, and maybe you can help us here. I'm looking at these, and these seem reactive is the word that comes. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do these things. Obviously, we need to do them. That we've been told we better be doing them. I'm just saying, for a balanced scorecard, I mean, yeah, we can repackage this and say we should collect data. I'm not getting terribly excited. I'm looking for some kind of innovation in here that's going to really grow the talent pool that we put in front of students.
I agree. I feel really like everything we have here, while it's obviously important, it's not addressing the entire development. So I guess I would just like to see the strategies more widespread to make sure that we're clearly hitting all of those objectives.
And I'd like to echo that with also saying that we want to recruit, develop, and retain top-notch educational leaders. And maybe we just want to put highly effective right in there as what we mean by that. Because to me, that's what we want to be always doing. We want to always be putting in things in place that are going to have the best leaders, the best teachers, the best everything. And whatever it is we put in here is doing that.
So Glenda, are you recommending we take top notch out and put highly effective?
Well, I'm fine with that because that's our system for measurement.
Does anybody disagree with that?
Totally fine with
I
that.
think that's a good idea.
I do too.
Thank you.
Because I think things underneath that, I think Sarah's right. That's what we're wanting to do.
Okay, we'll put high.
Teachers who are not measuring as effective, looking at the turnaround or increase of their measure over a set of time.
So for instance, and we suggested in here, actually gathering information about the effective teachers. What is it that they need in order to be highly effective? What is it that needs to be put in place to make that happen? And how can we utilize the highly effective pool to make that happen? Is it mentoring? Is a variety of things that occurs when you put people to work that are highly effective educators. They're not always being utilized within their district even. They have an impact in their classroom, but they're not always being utilized with the system at the local level to put things in place.
Can I offer a suggestion? I mean, just to kind of what I'm thinking. I work with the state of Ohio quite a bit in addition to Indiana because we have programs over there. One of the things Ohio did, and I'm not proposing we add this at this late point, but as a strategy, they created a teacher leadership endorsement that's postmasters to really try and once they found the highly effective teachers, to elevate them even more. In other words, so that within a local district, they're compensated at a totally different level, but they've created a pool locally to your own in-house, and to get it, it's not a degree, it's three classes. It wouldn't even have to be that. I'm not even saying it has to be 9 credit hours in Indiana. I'm just saying, is there any way to innovate a pathway, creating a fellowship, creating something of your most highly effective, that we're intentional about that, and we say that's what we're looking for, that's the model, and moving everybody toward that, rather than just saying we're collecting data and we're going to, that's what I'm trying to get at.
We see leadership academies
Right.
where states, support the leadership academies and are mentoring those and have a mentor program. So that's another strategy you could put in here if you're looking for some more actionable sorts of things.
There are some other states, it might be, it's not Colorado. It is a western state. I'll think about which one it is here in a little bit. But they have centers for educational leadership, so to speak. I mean, true centers that actually focus on that effort. And that might be something that we want to think of. I know that we can be looking at different states for how they might do some of that kind of work.
May I suggest?
I'm sorry.
Center for Educational Leaderships
Okay.
that are in a few states. Educators.
May I suggest something that we hearken back to our standards discussion, and that the board make it a top priority to research, understand, and design a response based on what we know about long-term professional development. For instance, we know the 2 hour and 1 hour, 1 day and go home thing doesn't work. So we'd get the best template research, and we come up with a great template for the ongoing professional development of educators in Indiana. Because I also think it's a little bit like the technology and new ways of delivering curriculum, there's probably going to have to be a coordinated and visionary process where you take some of the institutes and schools of ed and others that we already have and engage them in the right system and practice. But we could come up with this episodic thing or this initiative today. It seems we need to have a comprehensive effort to advancing the quality educators in Indiana.
I agree.
And it's too disjointed. BJ?
To me, is important to student teaching. Like when I'm in my student teaching, I want to be with, I'll use John Carl as an example in Evansville. State Teacher of the Year twice, National Teacher of the Year once. He's now had 2 student teachers that have been the VSC Teacher of the Year, and that's not by coincidence. I mean, they learned the right way to do things by being in his classroom. How can we ensure that our schools of education are putting those prep students into the classrooms with the people that we want them in? Right now, if you have a master's degree, you sign a paper, you get a student.
So we could have a strategy where we implement
Coming under what you said earlier.
right, it would be a
Right.
piece of that.
That would be a piece of that.
So in order to have a student teacher, you would have to be either ranked effective, highly effective, however we want to word it, but
And there's probably even some good professional development that takes place. I know, I've learned a lot about medical schools. You don't put medical students with physicians unless
I think maybe that goes back to the Ohio example with the 9 hours. That's something you could institute in those 9 hours if you'd like to have.
So, but my strategy would be to get a grasp of this thing.
Absolutely.
And we would set a deadline, and we'd come back with a comprehensive, based in research, best practice, and models, and look systemically to advance.
Critical role at the local level with curriculum and so forth. And I agree with our chairman that we should do that. Spend more time with it and have a really focused discussion on. But I want to be sure we have school board people accounted for, superintendents, principals, as well as teachers. Retention. There's the aspiring teacher. There's also the person leaving the university going into their first year of teaching, which is probably the most critical from a retention period. Have we talked about induction programs of any kind? A formal induction program within every district, and then how do we keep teachers who are there inspired and for 3 years? And so it is a major factor. And so I think we really need to spend a little more time with some specific strategies and be aspiring, as my colleague has said. Yeah, it's sort of vanilla and white bread here. I'd like to have more aspirational strategies and really get people inspired.
About 4 or 5 strategies here. We have the collected data on the evaluation system such as it is, and assess the effectiveness of its implementation. We have, I have a note here to come up with some better strategies on and retaining talented teachers. I have one on centers for, consider the use of centers for educational leadership or leadership academies. And then the linking student teachers to highly effective teachers as part of their
Mhm.
mentoring process.
And I'd wait on creating those leadership academies until we figure out that last one, because don't create something until we find out what.
I agree.
So just leave off the academy thing, or
I think
you
so.
talking
Well,
about
I
a
think
sequence?
we want to look at a lot of different
I,
things.
I just leave it as, I think, innovating new ways of approaching the whole
Yeah.
educator preparation
Study the
paradigm.
whole thing.
Because that's the thing I think Indiana's going to wrestle with, is we keep, and I support going down alternate routes. We're also going to be rethinking about what does it mean to be a educator preparator provider. Historically in the state, but it's got to be outside of our normal thinking about that.
No, how do you pay? How do you incentivize?
Exactly,
How you gonna get
exactly.
STEM
What kind of legislation needs to be there to
engineers
support
make
it?
outside of the
A lot of
profession?
things in here.
Absolutely.
We
I think you
need
got
that.
it there, Rick.
Okay, move to goal 3.
In a 5 or 10, a 7-minute break. Matter of fact, we'll give a whole 10. Let's be kind. Let's be kind. The kinder, gentler man Ellsworth. So 3:45, we're back at work.
Did he just say
Okay?
that?
Sorry, I was in a different place.
I was going to have distribution of teacher grades, correlation.
Yeah, 4.0.
I know
He
you
was in the
don't.
100th percentile on every subject on PSAT.
That's exceptional talent.
Pretty awesome.
Are we, Rick, we're on goal 3.
Goal 3.
Fittingly.
It's good.
Okay,
We
so
worked
this one
hard
has to
today.
do with the involvement and support of all Indiana stakeholders, and 3 objectives. We suggested a couple of lagging indicators there. We've got a blank on the second one, but at-risk students, ideally you want to work with families to minimize students at risk for dropping out. And you can also define that, at the lower level grades, students that are at risk of not moving up or what have you. There are a number of states that are looking at-risk calculations for students. Pennsylvania has a that at-risk calculation and monitor the data that you have that you currently collect. The other thing was around students on target for graduation, keeping track of, I was just in Florida last week looking at what they do. They're tracking courses completed, the credits that they've earned, the satisfactory completion or passing of some in-course requirements that they have for Florida. A number of factors that go into determining whether the students are on target for graduation. And they're actually using that. That can be a leading and a lagging indicator. You can calculate that on a every week basis if you want to, and show that at the school level, or you all could look at it at the beginning of the year. What percent of your ninth graders are on target for graduation? And use it as a lagging indicator from.
Can we talk about those a little bit?
Absolutely.
Deb, do we collect any information on this, or do we have capabilities to even collect information on these?
So let's talk about the at-risk indicators. At this time, we have not established an at-risk indicator. My understanding from discussions with West First before he left is at one point, Indiana did actually have an at-risk indicator, and that became obsolete when we realized that we don't exactly have the data points that we need that best fit that at-risk indicator. So in other words, prior to actually having the C data or C collection data where we had course completion information, actual grades for every class, they used some other methods in that at-risk indicator. When that C information came online, they felt that that at-risk indicator was really obsolete and that would need to be revised. So there are a number of across the U.S. of what this looks like. Attendance typically shows up in most of the at-risk indicators. As Superintendent Ritz pointed out a while ago, some of these numbers, we should need to be very cautious on using them, such as the expulsion, suspension, attendance is a very similar number that it's local control on attendance policies or expulsion, suspension policies. So it's very easy to make sure that they hit that number just by altering the policies.
So now on target for graduation. So I know that because I've visited many have anything like that at the state level?
We don't really have that information at the state level. Again, we have the course completion information, so we have partial information on this. Sorry.
Huh?
Sorry.
Oh, I see what you're doing.
Thank you. So for the percent of students on target for graduation, we don't collect that as a whole, nor have we really defined a metric for what that means to be on target for graduation. Does that mean that a student by the end of the 11th grade year has enough credits, according to who? So we don't exactly have that defined at this point. We do have a variety of data points. Again, we could potentially look at ECAs. Does on target for graduation mean that they actually passed their ECA by the end of their 10th grade year? We do have a variety of data points, but I think without knowing what we want that metric to be, formulas across the country for what that means to be on target for graduation. So that's something we'd have to take a look at, what we want that to mean, what we actually want that to mean in Indiana before we could figure out that calculation. It could mean a multitude of things.
Are other states actually using this, though, to measure healthy family-school relationships?
Other
Because
states are tracking this.
I kind of push back a little bit on whether it would actually measure that.
School relationships, probably not.
Okay.
I can't point to anybody specifically. But as an indicator of whether that relationship is working, a lagging indicator, the end result, I think it's actually a pretty good indicator, a lagging indicator. Because if that relationship is working, then you're getting your students to graduation, and you're lowering the risk of dropping out.
Yeah.
So
So why don't we just have graduation rate down there?
Looking at things a little more that help you drive to graduation rate. I think looking at students, it is my belief that every district ought to be looking at students at risk. And
So a healthy family-school relationship may not get a graduation diploma. I mean, they're not going to be in those statistics. I just don't think it measures what we have as our objective over there.
Not in no way weighing in on whether it's a good policy to use that particular data point, but if a student with disabilities, if they meet those requirements, they would likely, as we were talking about last week, they would likely get the waiver diploma. So they would fall within the parameters of the data point.
But I meant, my point was, you can't really ascertain as to whether there was a healthy family-school relationship as a result of that.
No, but what we do know, here's what we know.
The data wouldn't get skewed.
Where schools are connected, where families feel welcome, engaged, involved in their children's education, those students do better. It was very clear to me that takeover schools, when we visited them, the community was not fully engaged. Connect with community, the various agencies, social services, other business community. They can actually elevate attendance, graduation. It's a healthier environment. When education is a high priority in the larger community, and that community, starting with the parents, are engaged in the process, we're going to have more success. If a lagging indicator says would point back to some of these things about engagement would advance, we could assume some of it's relational, not causal, but we have to have some way to get everybody involved.
them into scorecards are things like PTA membership, PTA attendance, parent-teacher conferences, what else? Volunteer hours. And when I was in Charlotte, we actually tracked the number of partnerships that we established with corporations and nonprofits. So we were doing all of those. We had real measures, but what was the outcome? And that was why I suggested this. And I don't want to put they were seeing it through, and they had high completion rates. So that was the net effect of it. But honestly, at the state level, there's not much data that you have access to measure this. You could use PTA data and membership data, I suppose. But,
there's quite a bit of research out there that shows that it's not that kind of data that actually determines success for students. It is the actual what happens at the home front, not necessarily that you show up to a PTA meeting or that you come to a
Exactly.
bake sale or you belong to the PTA, but whether you actually have get at measuring it.
Sarah.
In one of our very early meetings, when we first started to flesh out what our goals should even be in the first place, this was one area where we did discuss possibly doing a community survey type of
I
a
did, yeah.
format.
Right, right.
To me, again, obviously survey isn't necessarily the most scientific way of doing it, but to me, that's the best way to really get a feel for how involved the community feels from their standpoint, not how involved the school feels the community is.
Michelle, were you going to point at something that you thought we should know here in this discussion?
Just since I think that folks from the goal teams were here to, if we could be helpful. I wasn't on goal team 3, but I did want to say, when I was in graduate school, I worked at Keith, and I was on grantees, or they had 10 grantees across the nation, and the entire purpose of those multi-million-dollar grants were focused on fostering parent engagement and community engagement in the grantee schools. The GEPRAs largely were about numbers served, but if it would be helpful to the board, I would be more than happy to contact OII and ask them if we could get the final GEPRAs and see what those metrics were. I was only there for the first 2 years of the grant. Well-being and student achievement. It was really interesting to see every grantee had to have at least 10 metrics that they used to track their progress and show their use of the money. So to the extent that would be helpful, I would be happy to do that and give to the board within the next couple of days.
And another group that may have some actual metrics is communities in schools. And we have several of those around the state of Indiana utilizing that program per se to have parent lead.
Sarah has an idea on the table that would create an interesting dynamic if we could get a scientifically valid understanding of how community leaders think and feel and are engaged in their school, how parents think and feel about and are engaged. Because if we move that up, the general culture supporting learning and education, and we all like the Pacers and those kind of things, but we need parents. It'd be an interesting thing to drive towards some, I'm sure we take an investment, some systematic and scientifically based process to measure that commitment, maybe even measure how educators feel the community and parents.
Time exploring too would be work Ed Trust has done. Karen Shonos research wrote 2 books recently in the last 6 years. It's being done, finding relational health of teachers to their students and teachers to the home.
Say that again, the
relational health between even in high concentrations where students were in a high number of poverty, for example, it was mitigated by the fact that the teachers understood design that do that. I know, for example, great city schools that work with us at UVA when I was down there, the first time I know, but I'm just offering that up as one or two
The
possibilities.
community and schools have some.
Well, yes, communities and schools, but already starting to gather that. I just thought we're already doing that in a pilot form. So we'll take a look at that survey too
Might
that
be
was
worth
already sent out to
expanding.
Occurs in the home at the local level. The community is one or two steps. I'm not saying exclude the community, but I think we're going to have much more of an impact. Does the family have a culture of really promoting education? And I think that's one of the key variables when you look at student success. Is there value to the education? Is it important within that home or not? And so I would hope, in addition to community, we really focus in on that home. We sort of if you look at it as self-reported data, and all that comes with that. And so the notion, if you ask whoever's in the home, how much time do you spend with your child each week on school-related activities? That's a wonderful question. And there's other kinds of questions that we could ask. And then in the notion of aggregating all this data, by asking directly in each of those homes, what is happening?
I would say, to pick up on your thing about changing attitudes, that's essentially a community. That's a process where some of those strategies are probably going to focus on communities rather than family home by home, but rather to build that attitude throughout the
Yeah, well, I think it's both. We have some communities throughout the United States who don't value education at all, but somehow there's kids with great success, and you go talk to the guardians, and they're all for
No,
education.
I agree. I'm just
And-
suggesting in terms of finding actual strategies to impact that. The strategies may well spill into community school relationships as well as family school relationships to affect that family school
Right, so we're saying the
dynamic.
same thing.
Yeah.
I'm agreeing that we should have strategy for both community and home. However, we should go to the lowest common denominator, which
So
is the
you
home.
would say both are important, start with the home,
Correct.
if you're gonna prioritize your activity, then because the culture informs families, vice versa. So there seems to be a clear agreement.
Yep.
That we want the family engaged in education and the school, the education center. And that we support, and we'll be obviously looking for strategies. The third one talks about the state of Indiana. The way I heard this and envisioned it started, that we could be state board, governor, other key leaders, engage Indiana in education, make it important, get a bully pulpit. Whether you speak about it, talk to your employees about it, mark. That's where our future is, and somehow through our leadership and making this a priority, we get this elevated. Is that what we understand here? It'd be a statewide initiative? How would we measure that one?
Well, just to throw out a suggestion, is it possible that following up on what I said, that the school and building school and community relationships and building those statewide relationships are actually strategies that support your ultimate lagging indicator, which is a strong family-school relationship that drives the student performance in the direction that you want to go. Do you need to measure those separately as lagging indicators, or do you need to attack those as school? Just as another way of looking at it.
The only thing about the state, I would say, and when we were talking about systemic and statewide and shared, whether using technology platforms or other ideas, that's a little bit unique role in pulling out some big-time talent to look at new paradigms and new ways we would educate.
Yeah.
Engage them in meaningful processes.
And I had the good fortune to work in a place for a couple of years where there was a tremendous amount of business community and other communities. But more than that, it brought credibility to the teaching profession. It helped the superintendent get funding for key programs from the local, because the county had to approve funding for the school board, so it helped. Of that school district, but it was all driven from the chamber out, and these were big companies. This was Bank of America, and back then First Union, and those kind of companies that were big time stepping in with the CEO. State chamber level to engage local chambers and reach out and encourage that kind of participation in the schools. And I think that's what you're saying.
I don't know what number we'd pick, 200 employers in Indiana, 500. And we would set up a what kind of things we'd like you involved in, to donate some of your, maybe chief information. We do and set out criteria means you're engaged in advancing education in Indiana. I'm pretty sure I know we would get, but you'd want to get the governor involved and everybody and use the bully pulpit. Especially with this tying these plans together, you could see tremendous motivation to do it.
And then the answer, then we have surveys for 3.1 and 3.2, and certified education partner program for 3.3. Moving to strategies.
Could be very dynamic. We'd have
Okay, so we just added that one as a strategy.
okay. So we're looking at the other strategies for goal 3?
Yes.
Is that okay with the committee here? We keep moving? These
so weird is because you have people only chose one objective per goal. Typically, we see scorecards that have 3 or 4 objectives, and then it becomes necessary to identify which objective each individual strategy is related to. So that column became somewhat
So, Glenda, there's work already on the school improvement planning process, as I recall.
Correct.
Is that first strategy something that we're stating here, or is that already ongoing? Does that go without saying?
It's part of our pilot with our focus and priority schools right now.
Okay.
And we're going to move into really require focus and change pieces as we go,
Okay.
which makes it really nice to move the needle
Yeah.
on key issues.
So do we need that as a strategy, or you're moving without a strategy just fine?
Well, I mean, I'm fine with it being on there. I'm not fine with the leading indicators necessarily.
Yeah,
And we had conversation about that
we struck
already.
that earlier, yeah.
Well, we'll have information from the surveys from Advanced Ed. So we can start to hone in on what that looks like. And they've already researched those to be in line with the actual school improvement pieces. So, I mean, we've already
process, but what do they recommend in terms of the stakeholder group that forms the guiding coalition within the school? Is it, it's more
it's
than just-
students, it's parents, it's educators, it's community people.
It could be the surveys that we talked about earlier.
Right.
The next one, the robust ongoing two-way communication process with stakeholder organizations.
Some of these things in this area are like duplicates, it seems. Page just says something about advisory council over here. It talks about having your two-way communication with your stakeholders quarterly. Over here, I mean, it's like lots of different input, and some of these are like the same.
your job to
Right,
winnow
right,
it
right.
down at this point. But that's why there is that level of repetition, is because we didn't want to leave anything out and disrespect anybody's input to the process so far.
Given that comment, how do we prioritize these? Because there's some that are a much higher priority than others. The other nice to do, but not necessary. Is that the kind of process you would recommend, or how do we process these now?
Well, the way we process them would be, once we get a good list, we identify what kinds of projects are you going to need to launch to make this stuff go, because it's just not going to happen. And then we look at, is there a logical sequence? Some things have to come projects we think you need to launch, and we'll give you a sequence, and then you all would, as you begin implementation, you sequence those projects.
So for right now, are we supposed to do anything with these, or you're saying you're going to take them back and then do?
Quality partner, leader in education.
Ultimately, it's up to you all whether these things stay on here or not. I mean, we're uncomfortable taking things off
And so
unilaterally. I mean, that's the other
Correct.
important thing, is that there needs to be a parking lot in this process for ideas that are important enough to do but can't be done yet.
Okay, so 3.3, the expand existing resources. You know, what you were talking about, Dan, at this board level, looking for other resources, other to engage community and parents. Um, that does, they
So let me play off of that. Is there anything in
I mean, they have a variety of ways in which they might accomplish that. Most frequently, happen.
strategy is, because that has exactly been my experience too, is it's listed, they're right there. So we had 5 members of the community sit on
Right.
the panel, and so therefore it's on how you're going to develop the cultural competency of the teachers. What is the strategic plan at the LEA level to involve those community partners in a meaningful way, whether they do that through mentoring programs like Kids Hope, or whether they create a family literacy program like I've heard Sarah talk about. I don't think the board has to direct it in terms of the specific thing. I'm just wondering if strategically we don't say,
Sarah's survey, because then you could say, you don't window dress it at the time you have to suddenly come up with a report. You have to
Right.
start charting data and say, you know, the state level parents feel this way on average, and here they feel this way. What signals are we sending the parents in our district about their engagement, involvement in education? The engagement in other areas where the survey could do that, or how engaged, how many certified partners do they have in other areas, and you only have this. What does it mean to be? So I'd kind of like to look at the outcomes with them, because it seems like we do a ton of
And build that in. How are you going to help promote what the school is doing? And obviously, the corporations might have more resources to do so, but I see this specific strategy linking heavily underneath that.
To your community partners, give us specific examples instead. Give us some specific examples of how the partnership increased student achievement.
and even reflected what was known in the survey. I mean, that's the other piece. If you're going to survey them, I mean, that's the level.
And I think that goes back to our other conversation. We got lots of different things where we can see what metrics they're using so that we can determine what those might be.
All right. The others on here that you really want to keep, you have the mention of the survey here on the second.
I don't know how to include this, so can I just get it out there and maybe you can either say it's a really bad one or you can help me shape it because I don't know how to articulate it quite well, but parent of a child that's constantly in trouble because
Constantly in trouble.
There's constant trouble. Maybe there's I mean, the new term is now oppositionally defiant. So I didn't know we had that, but we have ODD now. So OD, but a different kind. So I don't know how to help that, but I think flexibilities, I get that, but I also think it's how do we empower parents so that they feel they can help themselves. And even as we went through the standards process, we heard that, I want to be able to help my child. I need to have the resources locally to do that. And the easy response is to say is to get more involved.
Read and talks, might have been out your neck of the woods. A parent university was developed, maybe it was in South Carolina or North Carolina. A community did it. And the parent university it was a website and some other things. Trouble with math. Well, Rose Holman, deal. The typical problem, if you want to help summer reading, here's some things you can do. And here's even online training. Maybe we explore, maybe one of our strategies explore what would it be to get a parent university in the state of Indiana. Et cetera, et cetera. And some presentations around the state. I don't know, I don't want to get all the tactics of it, but it may be a strategy. We want a parent university to measure it, probably. I would be very interested in something like that.
Just going along with that, and I know they're already completely a development of some sort of an evening program where parents can come and learn how to help my child read, how to help with homework, something where we can give them an outlet to come in and respond to a lot of what we heard, especially through the standards process.
What's interesting about that, Sarah, maybe even get some major grants, say, we're going to do this better than any other state. There's probably some national funders of that. And it could become part of the Down syndrome challenge, very special education kind of groups. We could probably do something with that. And a lot of
provide childcare so that it's not an issue if I don't have anyone to watch my child, I can't come get this help. I think there are lots of ways that we can use those existing
feed into this, then you start seeing a coalescing of efforts. A value add, that'd be a vision worth pursuing, we could measure.
That's even something that could come through with our parent surveys, if we're doing that route. What areas would you find helpful to receive?
Grew up in that themselves. Coming back to school is not a very fun option for them. They don't look forward to that. If it becomes I love the parent university concept and to play off of that with outreach coordinators and it being a central clearinghouse where you can resource things. You can get universities to create little MOOCs that
You're doing it wrong
Yeah.
just
method, but responding to
here's a
what.
place I
we
can
do
go
it
get help to
together.
be
Right.
better.
Well, I think there's some energy around that strategy. That
certainly
would
agree.
engage parents.
That gets on the list.
And we want to, just a little bit of caution to that. They just want more, they want after school programs till 7 or 8 o'clock at night, or they want, so we just have to be careful that they're built around actually the parents are engaging and not the school taking on more and more and more and more and more to do what the parents should be doing.
Enroll their child in the most appropriate school they deem appropriate. Is this one, do you want to leave this one on here as a stay?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're a school voucher, so I think that'll just obviously grow.
All right, good, stays on there. All right. I've got a pretty good list then of strategies here. And anything else that's a big rock?
Next steps?
Next steps. Here's what we're going to do. This balance scorecard with all the ideas, winnow it down, clean it up, clean up the wording. We will those kinds of things. We want to see if we can get access to some baseline data for some of the measures, if that exists. Survey. That would necessarily mean a project to do some research and craft a survey, all that you do with that kind of thing, and administer it. We'll list needs funding to do some of this stuff, then that needs to be a part of the project. So we would indicate where there may need to be some funding associated with that. And if we have any kind of data or access to work with the full template of goals, objectives, strategies, measures, opine upon it and make comments and send it back to us or to Claire's team and then to us. And then we'll get that ready for presentation. You will offer any suggestions if there are any changes to it as a board.
So it's
And-
on discussion, is it on action?
Action. No.
Because I think we were thinking, how the progress we made today, we made a lot. We're gonna send that back by the end of this week, put that in a plan.
We'll
He takes
do
a
our
breath.
best.
I'm asking the question,
No, it
He
actually
doesn't want to
hasn't
miss the
come
Indy
back.
500.
We're not going to miss the June 4th deadline. No, that's
Can't
not
work
gonna
him
be-
Saturday.
Stay the whole week.
So,
How do we operationalize it from that point? Can you give us a
Yeah,
sort of a conceptual piece on that?
one of the things that I would suggest would be that you have in your institutional knowledge and the synergy that you all have gotten. Maybe you bring the goal team. There's a process that this and it identifies what they're going to do, what they're going to produce, when they're going to produce it, the schedule, who's actually on the team, any money that they need. For example, on the idea of the parent university, for you to make sure they got the essence of you prove it. You basically tell a team, here's your money, here's you go do it. And oh, by the way, we'd like to see you about every month or 6 weeks. Come back and tell you how they're doing. The reason you do that is most important for that day they work on. And I just know that from years and years of doing project management, that if you do the regular checkup, how are you doing, when it gets done. And you have them report back on for this very purpose. And in the best school systems that do this, they meet, superintendent meets every week and launches projects and monitors and manages it that way. And you just go down your list, launching them in sequence as you have resources. What I meant when I presented to you guys the first time I presented to you, this is a process. And it really isn't about this plan. This just gets you started. This is not the end result. This is just draft 1.0. And you want this thing to change. And but it's about the process of having ideas about strategies, launching projects. Yes, and I have seen as many as 40. I don't recommend that.
40, you said?
40.
And I
This-
would also add that we have pretty big
That's important, and, you know, your team's gonna get hit with some of these, and this team's responsibility is to make sure you get the funding to do it. You can't be expected to do all this. Money, so they had to spend it, so they were launching stuff like crazy. I wouldn't do that. 20, in a large urban, they were running about 14 concurrent projects. And we came up with that number, the superintendent chose that number, and he wouldn't let us add a 15th one until we finished one. So you'll set your own
priorities, and we'll have to do that. And there's some big things we already have underway, but
Yep.
it's more important to do some things well than to get a whole bunch of stuff that,
It is.
and then a reporting structure back and keep it the priority, and also aligning the resources here. This is a big key, because there'll be a choice of 5, 10, 30 things to do. Before 10,
For the plan, but the question is, how does it get operationalized? And so it's probably a discussion that the full board has to have about what sort of structure of all the possible structures makes sense to get this done.
In your organization, somebody to collect the charters, the project plans before they're presented, make sure they're of a high quality, to follow up with the project managers, which is an important concept. When you launch a project, you give each project one project manager.
we want to know, co-chairs is no chairs, right?
That's it.
Okay.
But that's the
Well,
way to operationalize it.
thank you very much. Are there any comments or concerns by this august committee?
I just wanted to clarify, so I think they're going to aim to get next iteration by the end of this week, is that right? You're going to be here in person on the 4th to present, is that right?
If you want me to. If you don't need me.
About the contract. We had, I already
That's covered today.
And
discussion for final action in July, so that we can have a robust conversation and we can carve out a good amount of time in case there's feedback that they provide, and then we can work with ourselves to make additional changes. Out for the June meeting, if they came out at all.
sure. I think we should, as a board committee, thank you for your good work. It was not group text, I understand. And then we'll see how the board feels about it in June. We'll know how to proceed, okay? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I want it noted in the minutes that we completed our work early.